They laughed at her. Not because she was rude. Not because she was wrong. But because she was small, poor, and desperate. The courtroom fell silent when a frail little girl stepped forward, barefoot, her dress torn at the edges, mud still clinging to the hem from the walk she had made in the rain. She looked straight at the most powerful man in the room, a judge feared across the state, a man who hadn't walked in 7 years, a man whose very name made lawyers nervous and defendants tremble. And with a trembling voice that somehow carried across that vast, cold courtroom, she said, "Free my father, and I will heal you." The room erupted in whispers. Some smiled, the kind of condescending smile adults give to children who say foolish things. Some shook their heads, pitying her delusion. A miracle? From her? A poor girl with nothing to her name but faith and desperation. But what happened next would silence that courtroom forever. It would make believers out of skeptics. It would challenge everything those people thought they knew about justice, about miracles, about the limits of human faith. Stay with me, because this is not just a story about justice. It is a story about faith, sacrifice, and a truth that cannot be mocked forever. Before we continue with this incredible story, I need to know where you're watching from. Drop your country or city in the comments right now. We love connecting with viewers from around the world. And if you're new here, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications too, because we bring you stories like this one, stories that will move you, challenge you, and stay with you long after the video ends. We've got more coming that you won't want to miss. Now, let's get back to Amara's story, because what you're about to hear will shake you to your core. Who was this girl? Why was her father imprisoned? And why did she believe, with absolute certainty, that she could heal a man doctors had given up on? Was it madness? Or was there something no one in that courtroom could see? Something deeper than the eye could perceive? Something that transcended the cold logic of medicine and law? And more importantly, what would happen if the judge said no? What would become of this little girl who had gambled everything on a promise that seemed impossible? Her name was Amara. Just Amara. No middle name, no fancy titles. She lived in a forgotten town called Millbrook, the kind of place maps barely noticed, where roofs leaked when it rained and dreams learned to whisper instead of shout. The town sat at the edge of the county, past the nice neighborhoods with manicured lawns, past the shopping centers and the chain restaurants, in a place where the roads turned from asphalt to gravel and streetlights became a luxury rather than a given. It was a town where people worked hard for little, where factories had closed years ago leaving empty buildings with broken windows, where the primary school had outdated textbooks and the playground equipment was held together with rust and hope. It was a town the rest of the world had forgotten, but for the people who lived there, it was home. And in that forgotten place, Amara lived with her father in a house that leaned slightly to one side, as if tired from bearing the weight of too many hard years. Her father, Eli Thompson, was a quiet man, the kind of man who spoke more through actions than words. He was a mechanic who fixed broken engines and fed stray dogs with leftovers from his lunch. His hands were always stained with oil, his fingernails permanently darkened from years of working with machinery, but those hands were gentle. They could fix a broken carburetor or bandage a scraped knee with equal care. To Amara, he was everything. He was her protector, her teacher, her best friend in a world that often felt too big and too harsh for a little girl without a mother. Her mother had died when Amara was only 3, a fever that came quickly and took her even quicker, leaving Eli to raise their daughter alone. He taught her how to read by candlelight when the electricity was shut off because they couldn't pay the bill. He told her stories about kindness being a strength, not a weakness, about how the measure of a person wasn't in what they owned but in how they treated others. And every night, without fail, he prayed with her before sleep. She remembered the smell of oil on his hands, mixed with the cheap soap he used to try to wash it away. She remembered the way he hummed old songs while tightening bolts, melodies from his own childhood that carried the weight of simpler times. She remembered the warmth of his laugh when she told him about her day at school, how he would stop whatever he was doing, wipe his hands on his worn jeans, and give her his complete attention as if nothing in the world mattered more than her stories about spelling tests and playground games. Their home was small, just 2 rooms with peeling paint and a stove that worked only half the time, the kind of place where you could hear everything happening in the next room, where privacy was a concept rather than a reality. But it was filled with something most mansions lacked, love that asked for nothing in return. The walls were covered with Amara's drawings, taped up with care. The kitchen table was scarred and wobbly, but it was where they ate dinner together every night, where Eli helped her with homework, where they played card games on weekends. It wasn't much. But it was theirs. And it was enough. But one night, everything changed. It was a cold November evening, the kind where the wind cut through your jacket and found every gap in the walls of poorly insulated houses. Eli had been called to the Riverside factory for an emergency repair. The generator had gone out, and without it, the entire production line would be shut down. It wasn't unusual. Eli often got late-night calls because he was good at what he did and he charged less than the big repair companies. He kissed Amara on the forehead before he left, told her to lock the door behind him, and promised he'd be back before she woke up. She watched from the window as his old truck rumbled down the street, its one working taillight disappearing into the darkness. That was the last normal moment of her childhood. Around midnight, fire trucks screamed past their house. Amara woke to the sound of sirens and the strange orange glow that painted her bedroom wall. She ran to the window and saw smoke rising in the direction of the factory. Her heart began to pound. She tried calling her father's cell phone, but it rang and rang with no answer. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. She sat by the window, watching, waiting, praying to a God she had been taught to trust but was now desperately testing. When the sun finally rose, instead of her father's truck, a police car pulled up to their house. 2 officers stepped out, their faces grim. And in that moment, before they even knocked on the door, Amara knew. She knew that life would never be the same. A wealthy businessman named Victor Crane, the owner of Riverside Factory, had been found unconscious after a factory fire. The building had gone up in flames, and by the time firefighters contained it, significant damage had been done. More importantly, Victor Crane was in the hospital with severe smoke inhalation and burns. Someone had to be blamed. In the harsh mathematics of justice, when something goes wrong and wealthy people are hurt, someone from the bottom has to pay. Eli was there that night, fixing a generator. He was poor. He had no lawyer, no connections, no powerful friends to speak on his behalf. And when the powerful pointed fingers, when Victor Crane's lawyers and the insurance companies and the factory management all needed someone to blame for negligence, for a fire that had caused millions in damage, the system listened. The investigation was swift. Too swift. Eli was arrested within 48 hours. The evidence against him was circumstantial at best. He had been working on electrical equipment near where the fire started. That was enough. No one asked whether the equipment was already faulty. No one questioned why a generator would be failing in a factory that had been cited multiple times for safety violations. No one wondered if perhaps the fire was inevitable, the result of years of cutting corners and ignoring regulations in pursuit of profit. No one asked these questions because Eli Thompson was nobody. Just another poor mechanic who could be sacrificed to protect the interests of those who mattered. The trial was a formality. Eli's public defender was overworked and underpaid, handling dozens of cases simultaneously. He encouraged Eli to take a plea deal, to admit guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence. But Eli refused. "I didn't do it," he said simply. "I won't say I did." So the trial proceeded. It lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented their theory, that Eli's negligent repair work had caused a spark that ignited flammable materials. They brought in an expert witness, paid handsomely, who testified that the fire pattern was consistent with electrical malfunction. They showed photographs of the damage, talked about the cost, the danger, the suffering of poor Victor Crane, who was still recovering in a private hospital room. The defense had little to counter with. No money for expert witnesses. No resources for independent investigation. Just Eli's word, and in the American justice system, the word of a poor man carries the weight of a feather against the boulder of wealth and influence. He was sentenced quickly. 15 years. No evidence that would hold up under real scrutiny. No mercy. Just the cold machinery of a system doing what it was designed to do, protect the powerful and punish the powerless. Amara watched as her father was taken away in chains, his eyes searching for hers across the courtroom, silently apologizing for something he didn't do, silently begging her to be strong, to not give up, to somehow survive in a world that had just proven itself to be crueler than either of them had imagined. That was the day Amara stopped being a child. She stood in that courtroom, clutching the hem of her dress, watching justice turn its back on the innocent. The gavel struck. The sound echoed through her chest like a physical blow. The doors closed. And her father disappeared into a system designed to forget men like him, to warehouse them away from sight, to make them invisible. She walked home alone that evening, the sky heavy with clouds threatening rain, and made a promise to herself: she would fight. Even if the whole world said no, she would keep fighting. Even if every door slammed in her face, she would find a window. Even if everyone told her to give up, to accept reality, to move on, she would not. Because he was her father. And he was innocent. And those two facts mattered more than anything else in the world. The months that followed were the hardest of Amara's young life. She was only 11 years old, suddenly alone in a world that had shown its teeth. Social services came knocking. They wanted to place her in foster care. She hid in a closet while a neighbor woman told them Amara was staying with relatives. It was a lie, but it was a kind lie. The neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived 3 houses down, had watched Amara grow up. She brought food sometimes, checked in on her, made sure she was going to school. But she couldn't take Amara in, not officially. She lived on a fixed income in a 1-bedroom apartment. So Amara learned to survive on her own. She learned to forge her father's signature on school forms. She learned to ration the little money he had hidden in a coffee can under the sink. She learned to eat cereal for dinner and to wear the same 3 outfits to school, rotating them so people wouldn't notice. But more than survival, she learned determination. Every weekend, she took 2 buses to the prison where her father was held, a 3-hour journey each way. She sat across from him in the visiting room, separated by plexiglass, talking through phones that made their voices sound tinny and distant. He always asked about school, about whether she was eating enough, about whether she was staying out of trouble. She always lied and said everything was fine. And then she would ask him to tell her again, exactly what happened that night at the factory. Eli would patiently recount every detail. How he arrived around 9 in the evening. How the generator was already making a strange noise, something wrong in the motor. How he had opened it up and found wiring that looked like it had been patched and repatched over years, a mess of repairs that violated every safety code. How he had started to fix it properly when he smelled smoke. Not from his work, but from somewhere else in the building. How he had run to find the source, had tried to warn people, had pulled the fire alarm before the smoke got too thick and he had to evacuate. Amara listened to this story dozens of times. She memorized every word. And slowly, a picture began to form in her mind. Her father wasn't the cause of the fire. He was a witness to something else. Something that someone didn't want exposed. She started keeping a notebook. In it, she wrote down everything her father remembered. Names of other workers who were there that night. Descriptions of the factory layout. Details about the equipment. She was just a child, but she understood something important: the truth was somewhere in those details. It just needed to be found. At school, while other kids her age were worried about social media and school dances, Amara spent her lunch periods in the library. She taught herself how to search public records online. She learned about factory safety regulations. She read news articles about the fire, noting the discrepancies between what was reported and what her father had told her. One article mentioned that Riverside factory had been fined multiple times in the years before the fire for safety violations. Another mentioned that Victor Crane had been trying to sell the factory, but buyers were concerned about the cost of bringing it up to code. A third, buried in the business section of the local paper, noted that the factory had been heavily insured. Pieces of a puzzle. Amara didn't fully understand what they meant yet, but she knew they mattered. She kept collecting them. As the months turned into a year, then 2 years, Amara grew thinner. The stress was eating away at her childhood. Her teachers noticed. The school counselor called her in several times, asking gentle questions about her home life. Amara had become an expert at deflecting. "I'm fine. My aunt takes care of me. Everything's okay." She couldn't risk the truth. If they knew she was living alone, they would take her away. Put her in foster care. Maybe even move her to a different district. She would lose access to the library, to her research. Worse, she would be farther from the prison. She couldn't let that happen. Her classmates had stopped inviting her to things. She had become the weird quiet girl who wore the same clothes and never talked about her family. Rumors spread. Some said her dad was in prison. Some said her mom had abandoned her. Some said she lived in a car. Amara heard the whispers but didn't care. Their opinions didn't matter. Only one thing mattered, freeing her father. On her 13th birthday, she made a decision. She couldn't do this alone anymore. She needed help. But who? The police had arrested her father. The lawyers were too expensive. The system had already shown its verdict. She thought about her father's faith. About the prayers they used to say together. About the stories he told her of miracles from the Bible, of David facing Goliath, of Daniel in the lion's den, of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. Stories of the powerless facing the powerful and winning, not through strength, but through faith. That night, in her empty house with the leaky roof and the unreliable stove, Amara knelt beside her bed and prayed differently than she ever had before. She didn't just ask for help. She made a vow. She said, "God, if you're real, if you're listening, show me how to save my father. I'll do anything. I'll give anything. Just show me the way." She waited in the silence. No voice answered. No miraculous sign appeared. But in her heart, she felt something. Not words, but a presence. A warmth. A certainty that she wasn't alone in this fight. And with that certainty came an idea. It was audacious. It was probably impossible. But it was something. She would go back to the courtroom. She would face the judge who had sentenced her father. And she would offer him something that no lawyer, no amount of money, no legal precedent could offer, a miracle. The idea should have seemed insane. Amara was a child with no power, no medical training, no special abilities. But she remembered her father's stories. She remembered that faith the size of a mustard seed could move mountains. And she believed. Not because it was logical. But because it was all she had left. The judge who sentenced Eli was Judge Harold Whitmore. A man known for strict rulings and rumored deals behind closed doors. In legal circles across the state, his name commanded respect. He had been on the bench for over 20 years, presiding over thousands of cases, sending hundreds of people to prison. He was efficient, thorough, and uncompromising. Lawyers who appeared before him prepared meticulously because Judge Whitmore suffered neither fools nor poor preparation. In poor neighborhoods, among families who had lost loved ones to the criminal justice system, his name inspired fear. He was the face of a system that seemed to have one set of rules for the rich and another for the poor. But Judge Harold Whitmore hadn't always been the hard man who ruled from that bench. Once, many years ago, he had been a young idealistic attorney who believed in justice. He had taken pro bono cases. He had fought for the underdog. He had been the kind of lawyer who stayed up late reading case files, who visited clients in jail to hear their stories, who believed that every person deserved a vigorous defense. But idealism is a fragile thing. Over the years, Harold Whitmore watched as guilty people walked free because they could afford better lawyers, while innocent people were convicted because they couldn't. He watched as the system ground down anyone who challenged it too hard. He lost cases he should have won. He won cases he should have lost. And slowly, he stopped believing in justice and started believing in law. There's a difference. Justice is about what's right. Law is about what's written, what can be proven, what the rules allow. Justice requires heart. Law can function with just a brain. And somewhere along the way, Harold Whitmore's heart had grown cold. He told himself it was necessary. That emotion clouded judgment. That mercy was fine in theory but impractical in practice. That his job was to uphold the law, not to save the world. He became a judge because he wanted authority, wanted to be the one making decisions rather than arguing before someone else. And he was good at it. Efficient. Fair in the technical sense. He followed the rules precisely, applied precedent correctly, kept his courtroom running smoothly. But fate, or perhaps God, or perhaps just the random cruelty of biology, had other plans for Judge Harold Whitmore. 7 years before Amara walked into his courtroom, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Judge Whitmore had been hearing a case about a property dispute. Boring, technical, the kind of case where everyone was wrong and the law had to pick the least wrong party. He was in the middle of questioning a witness when he felt a strange tingling in his left arm. He ignored it. A few moments later, his vision blurred. He gripped the bench, thinking perhaps he was just tired. And then his entire left side went numb. He tried to speak, but the words came out slurred. The last thing he remembered before losing consciousness was the sound of someone screaming for help and the sight of the courtroom tilting sideways as he fell. He woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. A stroke. A significant one. The doctors explained that a clot had blocked blood flow to part of his brain. They had managed to break it up, preventing further damage, but the damage already done was severe. His left arm had limited function. His face drooped slightly on one side. And his legs, both of them, were paralyzed. The doctors spoke in careful, measured tones about therapy and time and hope. They said that with extensive physical therapy, he might regain some function. Maybe. They couldn't promise anything. The brain was complicated, they said. Recovery was unpredictable. Some patients regained everything. Others regained nothing. He would have to wait and see. Judge Whitmore attacked physical therapy with the same intensity he brought to everything else. He worked harder than any patient the therapists had ever seen. He pushed through pain. He refused to quit. He was determined to walk again, to return to his bench, to prove that he was stronger than his own biology. Months passed. He regained some use of his left arm. The drooping in his face improved. But his legs remained stubbornly, frustratingly numb. He could feel nothing from the waist down. No sensation. No movement. Nothing. After a year of intensive therapy, the doctors gently suggested it was time to accept reality. The paralysis was permanent. He would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. He would need to modify his home, his courtroom, his entire life around this new limitation. Judge Whitmore refused to accept it. He sought second opinions, third opinions. He tried experimental treatments. He traveled to clinics in other states, other countries. He spent a fortune pursuing any possibility of recovery. Nothing worked. The best medical minds in the world all told him the same thing: the damage was done. He would never walk again. Slowly, painfully, he was forced to accept it. He returned to the bench, modified to accommodate his wheelchair. He continued his work. But something had changed. If he had been hard before, he became harder. If he had been unsympathetic before, he became cold. He looked at the defendants who appeared before him and felt nothing but disdain. They came with their excuses, their sob stories, their pleas for mercy. And he would think, I'm in a wheelchair and I still do my job. What's your excuse? He had suffered and received no special treatment. He expected the same from others. Pain had not made him more compassionate. It had made him more bitter. His colleagues noticed. His court staff walked on eggshells. His reputation evolved from strict to harsh. But he didn't care. Let them think what they wanted. He followed the law. He did his job. That was all that mattered. By the time Amara Thompson walked into his courtroom, Judge Harold Whitmore had long since stopped believing in mercy, in second chances, in the possibility that people could be better than their worst moments. He had stopped believing in miracles entirely. After all, he had prayed for one himself, in the early days after his stroke. He had begged God to heal him. And God had been silent. So why should he believe that anyone else deserved what he had been denied? When Amara first attempted to get her father's case reopened, she was 13 years old. She had spent 2 years researching, gathering information, teaching herself about the legal system. She had written letters to lawyers, to advocacy groups, to anyone she thought might help. Most never responded. Those that did sent polite rejections. Her father's case was closed. He had been convicted. Unless she had new evidence, substantial evidence, there was nothing to be done. But Amara had found something. Not proof yet, but a thread. She had tracked down 3 other workers who had been at the factory that night. 2 had moved away, wanting nothing to do with what happened. But one, a man named Marcus Webb, still lived in town. He was older now, working at a gas station, trying to forget. Amara showed up at his workplace one afternoon after school. She introduced herself as Eli Thompson's daughter. Marcus's face had gone pale. I can't talk to you, he had said. Why not? Because I was told not to. Because there are people who don't want that night talked about. What people? Amara pressed. What really happened? Marcus looked around nervously, then leaned in close. Your father's a good man. He didn't start that fire. But I can't say more. I have a family. I can't risk it. And he had walked away, leaving Amara standing in the parking lot with more questions than answers. But it was something. It was confirmation that her father was telling the truth. That there was more to the story than what had been told in court. She returned to Marcus several times over the following weeks. Each time he refused to talk. Until one day, when she showed up and found him smoking a cigarette behind the gas station, looking tired and old beyond his years. You're persistent, he said. I'll give you that. Just like your dad. He never gave up on that generator even when he probably should have. Tell me what happened, Amara pleaded. Please. He's innocent and you know it. Marcus took a long drag on his cigarette, then crushed it under his boot. The wiring in that factory was a death trap. Had been for years. We all knew it. We complained. Nothing was ever fixed. Too expensive, they said. Crane just kept patching things, keeping it running with duct tape and prayers. So the fire was inevitable? Amara asked. The fire was Crane's fault, Marcus said quietly. The inspectors had warned him. He ignored it. And when it finally went up, when he got hurt, he needed someone to blame. Couldn't blame himself. That would mean admitting he knew about the problems and did nothing. So he blamed the new guy, the one who had only been there a few hours, who nobody knew, who couldn't fight back. Will you testify to that? Amara asked. Marcus shook his head. I can't. I signed a paper. After the fire, before the trial, Crane's lawyers came around. They offered us money to stay quiet. Said if we talked, they'd sue us for everything we had. Most of us took the money. We needed it. And we were scared. So you let my father go to prison for something he didn't do? Amara's voice broke. I'm not proud of it, Marcus said, looking away. But I got kids. A mortgage. I couldn't risk everything. Amara wanted to scream at him, to tell him that he was a coward, that his comfort had cost her father his freedom. But she didn't. Because she understood. The system was designed to make people like Marcus choose survival over justice. Do you still have the paper you signed? She asked. The non-disclosure agreement? Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah. It's at home. Can I see it? He looked at her for a long moment. This small, thin girl with fire in her eyes and desperation in her voice. Why? What do you think you can do with it? You're just a kid. I don't know yet, Amara admitted. But I have to try something. He's my father. Marcus sighed heavily. Come back tomorrow. Same time. I'll bring it. The next day, Marcus handed her a manila envelope. Inside was the non-disclosure agreement he had signed. It was thick, full of legal language Amara barely understood. But she took it home and read it carefully, looking up words she didn't know, trying to understand what it meant. What she discovered was interesting. The agreement paid Marcus and the other workers to not discuss the fire publicly or with media. But it didn't prohibit them from testifying if subpoenaed by a court. It was a subtle distinction, but it was there. If she could get a judge to reopen the case, to issue a subpoena, Marcus could testify without violating the agreement. But how could she get a judge to reopen a closed case? She was 13. She had no lawyer. She had no standing. She couldn't just walk into a courthouse and demand justice. Or could she? Amara remembered something her father had told her once. The courthouse is a public building, he had said. Anyone can walk in. Anyone can watch. That's how democracy works. She decided to try. She put on her best dress, the one she wore to church before her father went to prison, though it was getting tight now because she had grown. She brushed her hair carefully. She wanted to look presentable, to be taken seriously even though she was a child. She took 2 buses to the county courthouse, an imposing building with white columns and marble floors, the kind of building designed to make people feel small. She walked up the steps, through the metal detectors, past guards who barely glanced at her. Inside, she found a directory. Judge Harold Whitmore, courtroom 4B. She found the courtroom and slipped inside. It was in session. The judge sat at his bench in his wheelchair, elevated so he could look down at everyone else despite his disability. Lawyers argued back and forth about something Amara didn't fully understand. She sat in the back row of the gallery and watched. The judge was terrifying. His voice was cold, precise. When a lawyer stumbled over a word, the judge's eyes narrowed. When someone was unprepared, he dismissed them with cutting remarks. This was the man who had sentenced her father. This was the man she needed to convince. The hearing ended. People filed out. Amara stayed seated. The judge was reviewing papers, his assistant at his side. The courtroom emptied until it was just Amara, the judge, his assistant, and a bailiff. Courtrooms closed, the bailiff said, noticing her. You need to leave. I need to speak to the judge, Amara said, her voice small in the vast room. The judge doesn't take visitors, the bailiff replied. You need to file a motion if you have legal business. I don't know how to file a motion, Amara said. I need to talk to him about my father's case. Judge Whitmore looked up for the first time. Your father's case? Eli Thompson, Amara said, standing up. You sentenced him 3 years ago. He's innocent. The judge's expression didn't change. If your father wants to appeal his conviction, he needs to file the appropriate paperwork with the appropriate court. This is not the venue. He did appeal, Amara said, stepping forward. It was denied. But there's new evidence. People who know what really happened. Then his attorney should bring that evidence forward through proper channels, the judge said, already looking back at his papers, dismissing her. He doesn't have an attorney, Amara said, her voice rising. He can't afford one. And no one will help us because we're poor and no one cares about poor people in this system. The judge's eyes returned to her, this time with irritation. Young lady, I understand you're upset about your father's situation, but emotional outbursts won't change legal realities. If you have evidence of wrongful conviction, there are processes for that. Follow them. I've tried. Amara said, and now tears were starting to form even though she didn't want them to. I've written letters. I've called lawyers. No one will help. No one cares. They say it's over, case closed, move on. But he's innocent and I can prove it if someone would just listen. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, I'm still here. Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Because what happens next is going to blow your mind. Amara is standing in that courtroom, tears streaming down her face, facing the most powerful man in the room who has every reason to ignore her. But she's not leaving. She's not giving up. And what she's about to say will change everything. Drop that comment right now. Let me know you're invested in this story. And keep watching, because we're just getting to the part where faith collides with reality in a way no one could have predicted. The bailiff moved toward Amara, ready to escort her out. But something made Judge Whitmore raise his hand, stopping him. Perhaps it was the raw desperation in her voice. Perhaps it was something in her eyes. Or perhaps he was just tired and wanted to get this over with quickly. What's your name? He asked. Amara, sir. Amara Thompson. How old are you? 13. And you're here alone? No parent? No guardian? My father's in prison, she said. Because of you. And my mother's dead. So yes, I'm alone. The judge studied her for a moment. The justice system isn't perfect, Amara. Sometimes innocent people are convicted. It's unfortunate, but it happens. However, we have appeals processes specifically designed to address those situations. If your father is truly innocent, those processes will eventually reveal that. Eventually? Amara repeated, her voice breaking. He's already been in prison for 3 years. How much of his life should he lose waiting for eventually? That's not for me to decide, the judge said. I presided over his trial. The jury found him guilty based on the evidence presented. Unless an appeals court overturns that conviction, my hands are tied. What if I could prove he didn't do it? Amara asked. What if I brought you evidence that showed someone else was responsible? Then you should present that evidence to his appellate attorney. He doesn't have one. Amara shouted. Don't you understand? We have nothing. No money, no lawyers, no way to make the system listen. And meanwhile, my father sits in a cell for a crime he didn't commit, and the real guilty person walks free. The courtroom was silent. The judge's assistant looked uncomfortable. The bailiff shifted his weight, unsure what to do. And Judge Whitmore sat in his wheelchair, looking at this small, fierce girl who refused to accept the reality he had long ago made peace with. Even if I wanted to help you, he said finally, which I'm not saying I do, I can't simply overturn a conviction because someone claims injustice. The law doesn't work that way. Then the law is wrong, Amara said simply. The judge's eyes flashed. The law is all we have. Without it, we have chaos. Without justice, the law is just tyranny, Amara countered. She didn't know where the words came from. Perhaps her father's teachings. Perhaps her own desperate courage. Judge Whitmore's eyebrows rose slightly. You're well-spoken for 13. My father taught me to read, Amara said. He taught me a lot of things. Like how to tell right from wrong. And sending an innocent man to prison is wrong. The jury disagreed. The jury was lied to. Silence again. Then Amara took a deep breath and said something she had been planning, something that had come to her in prayer, something that made no logical sense but felt absolutely right. Judge Whitmore, I know about your legs. I know you haven't walked in 7 years. I know doctors have told you that you never will again. The judge's face darkened. That's none of your business. What if I told you I could heal you? Amara said, her voice steady now, no longer crying, speaking with a certainty that seemed to come from somewhere beyond herself. What if I told you that if you free my father, if you reopen his case and look at the real evidence, I will heal your legs? You'll walk again. The room erupted in a different kind of silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of before, but a shocked, disbelieving silence. The assistant's mouth fell open. The bailiff actually laughed, a short, sharp sound he immediately tried to suppress. And Judge Whitmore stared at her as if she had just spoken in a foreign language. Excuse me, he said finally. Free my father, and I will heal you, Amara repeated. You'll walk again. I promise. The judge started, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. That's absurd. That's impossible. That's a miracle. Amara finished. Yes. It is. Young lady, I don't know what kind of religious fanaticism you've been exposed to, but miracles don't exist. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the best medical care in the country. I've tried every treatment, every therapy, every experimental procedure. Multiple doctors, all experts in their field, have told me the same thing, the damage to my spine is permanent. And you, a 13-year-old girl with no medical training, think you can somehow overcome that? I don't think, Amara said quietly. I know. Based on what? The judge demanded. Faith? Prayer? Magic? Based on a promise, Amara said. A promise from God. The judge laughed then, a bitter, harsh sound. God. Of course. Let me tell you something about God, Amara. I prayed too. When I first had my stroke, I prayed harder than I've ever prayed in my life. I begged God to heal me. I made promises. I tried to bargain. Do you know what God did? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So forgive me if I don't put much stock in divine intervention. Maybe, Amara said carefully, God was waiting for the right reason. Maybe healing you wasn't about you. Maybe it was about this moment. About giving you a choice. Free an innocent man and receive your own freedom in return. Or keep him in prison and stay in that chair forever. The judge's face flushed with anger. That's manipulation. That's blackmail. It's an offer, Amara said. A trade. Justice for mercy. Freedom for freedom. It's insanity, the judge shouted, his voice echoing off the courtroom walls. It's desperation dressed up as theology. And I won't dignify it with any more of my time. Bailiff, escort this girl out. Now. The bailiff moved forward, taking Amara gently but firmly by the arm. She didn't resist. But as she was being led toward the door, she turned back and said one more thing. 3 months. In 3 months, my father's case will be reopened. The truth will come out. And on that day, you'll have to decide, do you want to walk again, or do you want to keep pretending that justice was served? Get her out of here, the judge said, his voice cold. And Amara was escorted from the courtroom, down the marble halls, out through the metal detectors, and back onto the street where the world continued as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Seeds had been planted. Words had been spoken that couldn't be unspoken. And Judge Harold Whitmore sat alone in his courtroom long after everyone else had left, staring at nothing, his mind replaying the encounter, trying to dismiss it as the ravings of a desperate child but unable to shake the certainty he had seen in her eyes. That night, he couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in his mind. Not the promise of healing, he told himself, that was nonsense, but something else. The way she had looked at him. The conviction in her voice when she said her father was innocent. He had heard thousands of people claim innocence over his career. Most were lying. Some were delusional. A few were telling the truth. He had learned to distinguish between them. And something about Amara's certainty bothered him. Against his better judgment, he opened his laptop and pulled up Eli Thompson's case file. He hadn't looked at it in 3 years. He read through the trial transcript. The evidence had been circumstantial. The expert witness had presented a theory, not proven fact. The defense had been minimal. It was, he realized uncomfortably, the kind of case that probably wouldn't have resulted in conviction if the defendant had been able to afford a better lawyer. Not because Eli Thompson was necessarily innocent, but because the prosecution's case had holes. Reasonable doubt should have prevailed. But it hadn't. The jury had convicted. And Judge Whitmore had sentenced. He closed the laptop, telling himself it didn't matter. The case was over. The system had run its course. But sleep still wouldn't come. He kept seeing Amara's face. Kept hearing her voice. Free my father, and I will heal you. It was madness. Impossible. The desperate fantasy of a child who had lost everything and would believe anything that gave her hope. And yet something about it wouldn't let him go. Amara left the courthouse knowing she had failed. The judge had laughed at her. Dismissed her. She had played her only card and it hadn't worked. She sat at the bus stop, waiting for the bus that would take her back to her empty house, and cried. Not the angry tears from the courtroom, but deep, exhausted sobs that came from a place of complete despair. She had been so sure. So certain that God had given her this plan, that it would work, that faith would move the mountain. But the mountain hadn't moved. The judge was still in his wheelchair. Her father was still in prison. And she was still alone. The bus came. She got on, paid her fare with coins saved from skipping lunch, and sat in the back, staring out the window as the city passed by. When she got home, she did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She screamed. She screamed at God. She screamed at the universe. She screamed at the unfairness of a world where people like her father suffered while people like Victor Crane walked free. She screamed until her voice was raw and her throat hurt and she had nothing left inside. And then, in the silence that followed, she heard a thought. Not a voice, but a knowing. Keep going. This isn't over. She wanted to argue with it. Wanted to say she was tired, she had tried, it was impossible. But the knowing persisted. Keep going. So she did. If the judge wouldn't listen to promises of miracles, maybe he would listen to evidence. Amara returned to her research with renewed focus. She had the non-disclosure agreement from Marcus. She had his verbal testimony, though he wouldn't officially give it. She needed more. She started making phone calls. She called the fire department and requested the report from the Riverside factory fire. They told her it was public record and she could get a copy for a small fee. She counted out her coins and paid it. When the report arrived, she read it cover to cover. The fire marshal's report noted that the origin of the fire was in a storage area where flammable chemicals were kept. The chemicals were improperly stored, in violation of fire code. The electrical system in that area was also noted as faulty. However, the report concluded that the most likely cause was an electrical spark from Eli Thompson's repair work on a generator in an adjacent room. But Amara noticed something. The generator room and the storage room were separated by a wall. The fire started in the storage room. For Eli's work to have caused it, a spark would have had to somehow travel through a wall, into a different room, and ignite chemicals that shouldn't have been there in the first place. It was possible, technically. But was it probable? She called the fire marshal's office. She got transferred several times before finally reaching an investigator who had worked on the case. She explained who she was and asked him about the report. The report says the fire started in the storage area, Amara said. But my father was working in the generator room. How could his work have started a fire through a wall? The investigator sighed. Look, kid, I remember this case. The truth is, we couldn't determine the exact cause with certainty. There was too much damage. But the factory owner's lawyers pushed hard for a conclusion. They needed the insurance payout. And the electrical work was the most logical explanation given the circumstances. But not the only explanation. Amara pressed. No, the investigator admitted. Not the only one. The storage of those chemicals was a violation. If there had been any other ignition source in that room, a cigarette, a piece of faulty equipment, static electricity even, it could have started the fire. But we had no evidence of any of those things. Did you look for them? We did our job, the investigator said, defensive now. But after a fire that intense, a lot of evidence is destroyed. We work with what we have. And what we had pointed to the electrical work. Or someone pointed you there, Amara said quietly. There was a long pause. I can't discuss the politics of the investigation, the investigator finally said. But I'll tell you this, off the record, there were aspects of that case that bothered me. Pressure from above to close it quickly. A conclusion that felt rushed. But I'm a civil servant. I don't make policy. I just investigate and report. What happens with that report is above my pay grade. Would you testify to that? Amara asked. To the fact that the conclusion was uncertain. Not a chance, the investigator said. I've got 3 years until retirement. I'm not risking my pension to reopen a closed case. I'm sorry about your dad, kid. I really am. But I can't help you. He hung up. Amara added his name to her notebook anyway. Maybe he wouldn't testify voluntarily, but if he were subpoenaed, he would have to tell the truth under oath. She kept digging. She found out that Victor Crane had indeed collected a massive insurance payout after the fire. He had sold the damaged factory property to a developer for a significant sum. He had done very well financially from a disaster that had nearly killed him and sent an innocent man to prison. She found articles about Crane's business practices. He had been sued multiple times by former employees for unsafe working conditions. He had settled out of court each time. Nothing proven, but a pattern emerging. She compiled everything into a folder. Documents. Names. Timeline. Inconsistencies. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't proof. But it was doubt. Reasonable doubt. The kind that should have existed at the original trial. Now she just needed someone to look at it. Someone with the power to do something. She thought about going back to the courthouse, trying again with Judge Whitmore. But she knew how that would go. He would have security remove her before she even got close. She needed a different approach. She needed something that would force the system to pay attention. And then she remembered something. Her father had told her once about a legal concept called habeas corpus. It was Latin, he said, for, you have the body. It was a petition that prisoners could file claiming their imprisonment was unjust. It was a long shot, he had said. Most were denied. But it was a right. A way for prisoners to challenge their detention. Amara went back to the library. She researched habeas corpus petitions. She learned that they had to be filed in the court where the conviction occurred. She learned the format, the language, the legal requirements. And then she did something audacious. She wrote one herself. She was 13 years old with no legal training. But she had spent 3 years reading about the law, studying cases, teaching herself. She wrote a habeas corpus petition on behalf of her father, outlining all the evidence she had found, all the inconsistencies, all the reasons his conviction should be overturned. It was probably full of legal errors. Probably wouldn't meet technical standards. But it was something. The problem was, her father had to sign it. She couldn't file it on his behalf without his signature. So she waited until the next visiting day and took her buses to the prison. When she sat across from her father, she pulled out the petition and slid it through the slot in the plexiglass. "What's this?" Eli asked, picking it up. "A habeas petition," Amara said. "I need you to sign it." Eli read through it, his eyes widening as he went. "Amara, did you write this?" She nodded. "Where did you learn how to?" He stopped, shaking his head in amazement. "Sweetheart, this is incredible. But you know these almost never work, right?" "I know," Amara said. "But it's a chance. It'll force the court to at least look at the evidence." "What evidence?" Amara told him everything. About Marcus and the non-disclosure agreement. About the fire marshal's doubts. About Crane's insurance payout. About all the pieces she had put together. Eli listened, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "Amara, these are powerful people you're poking at. People who don't like being questioned." "I don't care," Amara said. "They can't do anything worse to us than they already have." "They could hurt you," Eli said, his voice tight with fear. "They could, they won't," Amara interrupted. "Because we're going to tell the truth, and the truth is going to set you free." Eli looked at his daughter, this fierce, determined young woman who used to be his little girl. "When did you grow up?" he asked softly. 3 years ago, Amara said. "The day they took you away." Eli's eyes filled with tears. He signed the petition with a trembling hand. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. "And I'm so sorry you've had to do all this." "Don't be sorry," Amara said. "Just be ready. Because you're coming home soon. I promised." She took the signed petition back, said goodbye to her father, and left the prison with a document that would either change everything or amount to nothing. She filed it at the courthouse the next day. The clerk barely looked at her, just stamped it received and tossed it in a pile with dozens of others. "How long until someone looks at it?" Amara asked. The clerk shrugged. "Couple months, maybe. We're backed up." "But it's urgent," Amara said. "They're all urgent, honey," the clerk replied, not unkindly. "You'll get a response when the judge has time to review it." "Which judge?" Amara asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Depends on the rotation. But since Judge Whitmore presided over the original case, it'll probably go to him for review." Of course it would. Everything kept coming back to Judge Harold Whitmore. The man who had sent her father to prison. The man she had promised to heal. The man who didn't believe in miracles. Judge Harold Whitmore tried to forget about Amara Thompson. He told himself she was just another desperate person grasping at impossible solutions. He had seen hundreds of them over the years. People who couldn't accept reality, who invented fantasies to cope with their pain. It was sad, but it wasn't his problem. His job was to interpret law, not to indulge delusions. But forgetting proved difficult. Over the following weeks, he found himself thinking about her at odd moments. During trials, he would remember her voice. At night, he would recall the certainty in her eyes. He tried to dismiss it, but the memory persisted like a splinter he couldn't remove. His sleep, never good since the stroke, became worse. He would lie awake, his useless legs dead weight beneath the covers, and wonder. Not about miracles, he still didn't believe in those. But about the case itself. Had there been reasonable doubt? Had the jury been swayed by circumstantial evidence because the defendant was poor and the victim was wealthy? These were uncomfortable questions. Questions that challenged his belief that he was a fair arbiter of justice. One night, unable to sleep, he went further than just reviewing the trial transcript. He started researching Victor Crane. It didn't take long to find troubling patterns. Multiple lawsuits. Safety violations. A business built on cutting corners. And the insurance payout after the fire had been enormous, far more than the property was worth. Enough to make someone wonder if the fire had been convenient for Crane. Judge Whitmore stopped himself. What was he doing? The case was closed. Eli Thompson had been convicted by a jury of his peers. Even if there were questions, there were proper channels for appeals. He couldn't just start investigating on his own. That wasn't his role. But the questions wouldn't stop. And then, 6 weeks after Amara's visit, the habeas corpus petition landed on his desk. He recognized the name immediately, Eli Thompson. He opened it with a sense of inevitability, as if he had known this was coming. The petition was remarkable. Clearly written by someone with limited legal training, it nonetheless hit the major points. It outlined evidence that had not been presented at trial. It raised legitimate questions about the investigation. It argued, persuasively, that the conviction had been based on circumstantial evidence that didn't meet the standard of beyond reasonable doubt. Judge Whitmore read it twice. Then he looked at the signature. Eli Thompson's signature, yes. But below it, in small letters, prepared by Amara Thompson, daughter. She had done this. A 13-year-old girl had researched, written, and filed a legal petition that was better than half the ones filed by actual attorneys. Under normal circumstances, he would have denied it quickly. Habeas petitions were almost always denied unless they contained clear evidence of constitutional violations. This one didn't meet that threshold. It raised questions, yes. But questions weren't enough. But these weren't normal circumstances. Judge Whitmore sat in his chambers, the petition in front of him, and faced a choice. He could do his job as he had always done it, apply the rules, follow the procedures, deny the petition because it didn't meet technical standards. Or he could do something he rarely did, use his discretion. He could order a hearing. Allow the evidence to be presented. Let witnesses testify. It wouldn't guarantee anything. But it would give Amara what she wanted, a chance for the truth to be heard. Why was he even considering this? Because a girl had promised to heal his legs? That was absurd. He didn't believe she could do that. He didn't believe anyone could. So why couldn't he just deny the petition and move on? Because, he finally admitted to himself, something about this case had bothered him from the beginning. The conviction had been too easy. The evidence too convenient. And he had let it happen because it was easier than questioning it. Eli Thompson was nobody. Victor Crane was somebody. The system was designed to process cases like this quickly and quietly. And Judge Harold Whitmore had been a part of that system for so long that he had stopped questioning whether it was right. He made a decision. He would order a hearing. Not because he believed in miracles. Not because he thought a child could heal him. But because maybe, just maybe, justice deserved another look. He wrote the order and signed it. The hearing would be scheduled in 30 days. Both sides would be allowed to present evidence. He would hear testimony from any relevant witnesses. And then he would make a ruling based on the facts, not on who had better lawyers or more money. When Amara received the notice that her father's habeas petition had been granted a hearing, she stood in her kitchen reading the letter 3 times to make sure she understood it correctly. Then she fell to her knees and cried. Not tears of sadness this time, but relief. Someone was listening. Someone was giving them a chance. She had 30 days to prepare. 30 days to gather witnesses, to organize evidence, to build a case that would free her father. It should have been impossible. She was a child with no resources. But she had something more powerful than money, she had truth and determination. She went back to Marcus. This time, armed with the court order. "You're going to be subpoenaed," she told him. "The judge is reopening the case. You'll have to testify." Marcus's face went pale. "They'll destroy me. Crane's lawyers will sue me for violating the NDA." "They can't," Amara said, showing him the relevant clause. "The agreement allows testimony under subpoena. You're protected." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Amara said, though she wasn't entirely. But she needed him to believe it. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "You're really going to do this, aren't you? Take on Victor Crane and his army of lawyers, all by yourself?" "Not by myself," Amara said. "I have the truth. And I have you. And I have others who know what really happened." "What others?" Amara smiled slightly. "Let me worry about that." Over the next 30 days, Amara worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. She tracked down the other workers who had been at the factory that night. Most wanted nothing to do with her. But one, an older woman named Linda Chen, no relation to Amara's neighbor, agreed to testify. She had been in the storage room earlier that evening and had noticed the improper chemical storage. She had reported it to her supervisor, who had told her it wasn't her problem. She had been eaten up by guilt ever since the fire, knowing that her silence had contributed to someone being blamed unjustly. Amara also contacted the fire marshal investigator who had expressed doubts. She explained that he would likely be subpoenaed and would have to testify truthfully. She wanted him to know ahead of time, to be prepared. He wasn't happy about it, but he couldn't refuse a court order. She prepared her father, visiting him as often as the prison allowed, going over every detail of that night, making sure his testimony would be clear and consistent. She organized all her evidence into a presentation that made sense, that told a story, that showed reasonable doubt. And every night, she prayed. Not just for her father's freedom anymore. But for something else. For the judge. She prayed that his heart would soften. That he would see the truth. And yes, she prayed for his healing. Not because it was a bargain anymore. But because she had come to understand something, healing wasn't just about legs that could walk. It was about hearts that could feel again. Souls that could believe again. And Judge Harold Whitmore needed healing just as much as his body did. The night before the hearing, Amara couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, going over everything in her mind. She had done all she could. She had gathered evidence. She had found witnesses. She had prepared as well as a 13-year-old with no legal training possibly could. But was it enough? What if the judge denied the petition anyway? What if Crane's lawyers were too good? What if the system protected itself the way systems always did? She got out of bed and knelt beside it, as she had done every night with her father before he was taken away. "God," she whispered into the darkness, "I've done everything I know how to do. The rest is up to you. If you're real, if you're listening, please let truth win tomorrow. Please bring my father home." She waited in the silence, hoping for a sign, for a feeling, for anything that would tell her it would be okay. Nothing came. Just silence. But somehow, the silence felt less empty than it had before. And Amara climbed back into bed and, against all odds, fell asleep. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the hearing. Local news had picked up the story, 13-year-old girl fights to free her father. It was the kind of human interest story that filled slow news days. Reporters lined the back row. Curious citizens filled the gallery. And at the front, Judge Harold Whitmore sat in his wheelchair at the bench, his face unreadable. Eli Thompson was brought in from prison, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked thinner than Amara remembered, older, exhausted. But when he saw her sitting in the front row, his face transformed. He smiled, and for a moment, he was her father again, not a prisoner. Victor Crane was there too, in an expensive suit, surrounded by 3 lawyers who looked like they charged more per hour than Amara's house was worth. He looked annoyed, as if this hearing was an inconvenience rather than a matter of justice. The judge called the hearing to order. "We're here to review the habeas corpus petition filed by Eli Thompson," he said. "This is not a new trial. This is a hearing to determine whether there is sufficient new evidence or procedural error to warrant further action. Miss Thompson, I understand you prepared this petition." Amara stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you're representing your father in this proceeding?" One of Crane's lawyers immediately stood. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The petitioner is a minor with no legal credentials. She cannot represent anyone in a legal proceeding." Judge Whitmore looked at the lawyer with cold eyes. "Counselor, this is a habeas hearing, not a criminal trial. The rules are more flexible. If Mr. Thompson wishes his daughter to present his case, that is his right. Unless you have a specific legal precedent that prohibits it." The lawyer sat down, unable to cite one. "Proceed, Miss Thompson," the judge said. Amara took a deep breath and began. She had written out her opening statement and practiced it dozens of times. But now, standing in front of all these people, she set her notes aside and spoke from her heart. "Your Honor, my father is innocent. He didn't start the fire at Riverside Factory. He was there to fix a generator, which he did. The fire started in a different room, in a storage area where chemicals were illegally stored in violation of fire codes. The investigation was rushed. The conclusion was convenient. And my father, because he was poor and couldn't afford to defend himself properly, was blamed for something he didn't do." She proceeded to present her evidence. She called Marcus Webb to the stand. He was nervous, kept glancing at Crane's lawyers, but he told the truth. He testified about the unsafe conditions, about the non-disclosure agreement, about the pressure they had all been under to stay silent. Crane's lawyers tried to discredit him, suggesting he was lying to get out of his NDA obligations. But Marcus held firm. "I signed that paper because I was scared," he said. "And I've regretted it every day since. Eli Thompson is a good man. He didn't deserve what happened to him." Next, Amara called Linda Chen. She testified about seeing the improper chemical storage, about reporting it to her supervisor, about being told to mind her own business. "That storage violation was an accident waiting to happen," she said. "I knew it. Everyone knew it. But Mr. Crane didn't want to spend the money to fix it properly." Crane's lawyers objected repeatedly, calling the testimony hearsay and irrelevant. But Judge Whitmore allowed it, noting that habeas hearings had more relaxed evidentiary standards. Then Amara presented the fire marshal's report and called the investigator who had worked on it. He testified reluctantly but honestly. "The conclusion was the most probable based on available evidence," he said. "But there were other possibilities. The investigation was closed quickly, faster than I would have liked." "Why was it closed quickly?" Amara asked. The investigator hesitated. "There was pressure from the factory owner's insurance company. They needed a conclusion for the payout. So the investigation was influenced by financial interests." "I wouldn't say influenced," the investigator said carefully. "But there was definitely pressure to reach a conclusion." Amara then did something risky. She called Victor Crane himself to the stand. His lawyers objected strenuously, but Judge Whitmore allowed it. Crane took the stand looking irritated and confident. Amara approached him with her notes in hand. "Mr. Crane, how many safety violations had Riverside Factory been cited for in the 5 years before the fire?" "I don't recall the exact number," Crane said. "More than 5? Possibly. More than 10? Crane's lawyer stood. "Objection, Your Honor. This is badgering. This is establishing pattern," Amara countered. "I'll allow it," Judge Whitmore said. "Answer the question, Mr. Crane." "Probably around 12, Crane admitted." "And how many of those violations were corrected?" "We were in the process of addressing them. But they weren't corrected by the night of the fire." We were working on a timeline. A timeline that prioritized profit over safety. Objection. Sustained, the judge said. Miss Thompson, rephrase. Mr. Crane, isn't it true that the fire started in a storage area where chemicals were improperly stored in violation of fire code? That's what the investigation suggested. And isn't it true that you were aware of that violation before the fire? Crane shifted uncomfortably. I was aware there were some storage issues. Issues that your company chose not to fix. We were addressing them in due course. But not soon enough, Amara said. And when the fire happened, when you were injured and your factory was destroyed, instead of taking responsibility for years of neglect, you blamed my father, a man who had been in your building for less than 3 hours. I didn't blame anyone, Crane said. The investigation determined, the investigation that you and your insurance company pressured to close quickly? Amara interrupted. The investigation that needed someone to blame so you could collect your insurance payout? Crane's face reddened. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious question, Amara said. Did you collect insurance money from the fire? That's a matter of public record, and yes, the property was insured. How much? I don't see how that's relevant. Your Honor, Amara said, turning to the judge. Permission to treat Mr. Crane as a hostile witness? One of Crane's lawyers leaped up. Your Honor, she can't do that, she's not even a real lawyer. Judge Whitmore looked at Amara with something that might have been respect. Request granted. Mr. Crane, answer the question. $3.2 million, Crane said through gritted teeth. And the property was worth? Before the fire, about $1 million. So you made money from the fire, Amara said. It's not that simple, Crane sputtered. I was injured, I had medical bills, which were covered by separate insurance, Amara said, glancing at her notes. So you profited from a fire that happened because of safety violations you chose not to fix, and my father went to prison for it. Objection, multiple lawyers said simultaneously. Withdrawn, Amara said, returning to her seat. The room was silent. She had done it. She had shown reasonable doubt. She had exposed the holes in the prosecution's case. She had given the judge exactly what he needed to overturn the conviction. Judge Whitmore called a brief recess to review the evidence. When court reconvened, the tension was palpable. Amara sat next to her father, holding his cuffed hands. Eli whispered to her, whatever happens, I'm proud of you. The judge wheeled himself back to the bench. The room fell silent. I've reviewed the evidence presented today, he began. And I've reviewed the original trial transcript. This court finds that there are substantial questions about the sufficiency of evidence that led to Mr. Thompson's conviction. Amara's heart leaped. Crane's lawyers exchanged worried glances. However, the judge continued, and Amara's hope plummeted, this court does not have the authority to simply overturn a jury verdict based on a habeas hearing. What I can do is order a new investigation into the fire, and I can recommend to the state appellate court that Mr. Thompson's conviction be reviewed. In the meantime, given the questions raised about the evidence, I am granting bail pending that review. The courtroom erupted. Reporters started talking. Crane's lawyers were on their feet objecting. But Judge Whitmore banged his gavel. Mr. Thompson, you are released on your own recognizance, pending review by the appellate court. The conditions of your release are that you remain in the state and appear for any scheduled hearings. Do you understand? Eli was crying. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge looked directly at Amara. Miss Thompson, you've presented a compelling case today. Whether it will ultimately result in your father's exoneration, I cannot say. But you've given him something he didn't have before, a chance. And you've reminded this court that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied. Thank you, Your Honor, Amara said, her voice trembling. But, she hesitated, then continued. I made you a promise. The room went silent again. Everyone remembered. The judge's expression was unreadable. "Miss Thompson, I think we should discuss that later. For now, you should take your father home." The hearing was adjourned. Eli was processed out of custody, a procedure that took another 2 hours. But finally, he walked out of the courthouse a free man for the first time in 3 years. Amara hugged him so hard she thought her arms might break. They stood on the courthouse steps, father and daughter reunited, crying together. The reporters wanted statements. Amara said simply, "My father is innocent. The truth is coming out. And we thank God for this chance." They took a bus home, Eli seeing his neighborhood again after so long. The house was exactly as he'd left it, a little more run down, but still standing. That night, they cooked dinner together, the first meal they'd shared in 3 years. They didn't talk much. There was too much to say and not enough words. They just sat together, grateful to be in the same room again. 3 days after the hearing, there was a knock on their door. Amara opened it to find Judge Harold Whitmore in his wheelchair, alone, no assistant or driver visible. "Your Honor," she said, surprised. "Miss Thompson," he said formally. "May I come in?" Amara looked back at her father, who nodded. She opened the door wider, and the judge wheeled himself inside their small living room. Eli stood. "Judge Whitmore. I don't know what to say except thank you." "Sit down, Mr. Thompson," the judge said. "I'm not here as a judge right now. I'm here as," he paused, searching for the word. "As someone who owes your daughter a conversation." Eli sat. Amara remained standing, unsure what was happening. The judge looked around their modest home, taking in the peeling paint, the worn furniture, the evidence of years of struggle. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told Amara. "About your promise." "I meant it," Amara said quietly. "I meant it," Amara said quietly. "I know you did," the judge replied. "That's what bothers me. Not that you made an outrageous claim, but that you believed it so completely. I've been trying to understand why." He paused, looking down at his useless legs. "I've spent 7 years in this chair. 7 years trying every treatment, every therapy, every experimental procedure that medical science could offer. I've prayed, though I'm ashamed to admit I stopped believing those prayers would be answered. I've bargained with God, with fate, with whatever force might be listening. And nothing changed. Until now," Amara said softly. The judge looked up at her. "I didn't grant that hearing because I believed you could heal me. I granted it because the evidence warranted it. Because justice, real justice, demanded another look at your father's case. I want you to understand that." "I do understand," Amara said. "But that doesn't change what I promised. You freed my father, well, you started the process. And I will keep my word." "How?" the judge asked, and for the first time, his voice carried something other than cold authority. It carried vulnerability. "How can you possibly believe you can do something that the best doctors in the country couldn't do?" "Because," Amara said, sitting down across from him, "healing isn't always about medicine. My father told me once about a verse in the Bible. It says that faith can move mountains. Not might move them. Not could move them. Can move them. I believe that. Not because I'm naive, but because I've seen it work." "Seen what work?" "Faith," Amara said simply. "You've been in that chair for 7 years. In that time, did you ever really believe you would walk again? Or did you just go through the motions, trying treatments you didn't think would work, praying prayers you didn't think would be answered?" The judge was silent for a long moment. "No," he finally admitted. "I suppose I didn't believe. How could I? The doctors were clear. The damage was permanent. But what if the doctors were wrong?" Amara asked. "Not about the medical facts, but about what's possible. What if there are kinds of healing that don't happen in hospitals? You're talking about faith healing, the judge said, skepticism creeping back into his voice. Miracles. I've read about those. Plenty of con artists have made fortunes promising desperate people what they want to hear. I'm not asking for money, Amara said. I'm not asking for anything except that you trust me. That you let me try. Eli spoke up then. Judge Whitmore, I don't know if my daughter can do what she says. I don't understand how any of this works. But I know she has a gift. I've seen it before, in small ways. When her mother was dying, Amara would sit with her, pray with her. The doctors said she had days left. But after Amara's prayers, she had 3 more months. Good months. Peaceful months. The doctors called it unexplainable remission. Amara called it answered prayer. Her mother still died, the judge pointed out. Yes, Eli agreed. Because some things aren't meant to be changed. But some things are. And maybe you're one of them. Judge Whitmore looked between them, these two people who had every reason to hate him, who should have wanted revenge for the 3 years of suffering he had caused, but instead were offering him hope. What do I have to do? He asked finally. Nothing, Amara said. Just let me pray for you. And believe that it's possible. I don't know if I can believe, the judge said honestly. Then believe that I believe, Amara said. Let my faith be enough for both of us. The judge nodded slowly. All right. But not here, not now. There's something I need to do first. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. This is a letter to the state appellate court. I'm recommending that your father's conviction be overturned based on insufficient evidence and failure of the original investigation to pursue alternative explanations. I'm also recommending that the state attorney general investigate Victor Crane for possible insurance fraud and criminal negligence. He handed the letter to Eli. I can't guarantee they'll listen. But it's the strongest recommendation I can make. Why are you doing this? Eli asked, his voice thick with emotion. Because it's right, the judge said simply. Because your daughter showed me that I've been hiding behind procedure and precedent instead of pursuing justice. Because I've been so focused on what the law allows that I forgot what justice requires. And because, he looked at Amara, someone reminded me that faith and truth are more powerful than any system we create. He turned his wheelchair toward the door, then paused. Tomorrow evening. There's a small chapel 2 blocks from the courthouse. St. Mary's. I'll be there at 7. If you still want to try, that's where we'll do it. I'll be there, Amara promised. And the judge left, wheeling himself out into the evening, leaving Amara and her father staring at each other in amazement. That night, Amara couldn't eat. Her stomach was twisted in knots of anticipation and fear. Her father noticed and sat beside her at their kitchen table. Are you scared? He asked. Terrified, Amara admitted. What if I can't do it? What if I promised something I can't deliver? Then we'll deal with that, Eli said. But you can't doubt yourself now. You've come too far. You've done too much. But what if God doesn't answer? Amara whispered, voicing her deepest fear. What if I pray and nothing happens? What if I was wrong about everything? Eli took her hands in his. Listen to me, sweetheart. You weren't wrong about me being innocent. You weren't wrong about fighting for the truth. You weren't wrong about having faith when everyone else said to give up. And you're not wrong about this. I don't know how it will happen. I don't know what it will look like. But I believe, with everything in me, that tomorrow something extraordinary will occur. How can you be so sure? Because I've watched you for 3 years. I've seen you refuse to quit when any reasonable person would have given up. I've seen you teach yourself law, track down witnesses, stand up to powerful people, all because you believed in something bigger than yourself. That kind of faith doesn't come from nowhere, Amara. That comes from God. Amara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I'm just a kid, Dad. I don't have special powers. I don't know what I'm doing. Neither did David when he faced Goliath, Eli said. Neither did Moses when he stood before Pharaoh. Neither did Mary when an angel told her she'd give birth to the Savior of the world. God doesn't choose people because they're powerful or knowledgeable. He chooses people who are willing. And you've been willing from the start. They prayed together that night, father and daughter, kneeling beside the worn couch in their small living room. They prayed for wisdom, for strength, for guidance. And they prayed for Judge Harold Whitmore, that his heart would be open, that his body would be healed, that he would experience the kind of miracle that would restore not just his legs but his faith in something beyond himself. Amara barely slept. She lay in bed watching the shadows on her ceiling, going over everything in her mind. What would she say? What would she do? She had no plan, no script. She just had faith, and right now, that faith felt as fragile as a candle flame in a strong wind. But morning came anyway, as mornings do. Amara went to school, though she couldn't concentrate on anything. Her teachers' voices seemed to come from far away. Her classmates' conversations about tests and crushes and weekend plans felt irrelevant. She was living in a different reality now, one where impossible things were about to happen. After school, she went home and changed into her best dress, the same one she had worn to court. She brushed her hair carefully. She wanted to look presentable, though she wasn't sure why it mattered. Her father had taken the day off from the garage where he'd found work immediately upon his release. He was wearing his one good suit, the same one he'd worn to trial. "You ready?" he asked when it was time to go. "No," Amara said honestly. "But let's go anyway." They walked the 6 blocks to St. Mary's Chapel. It was a small Catholic church, old and beautiful in a faded way, with stained glass windows that caught the late afternoon sun and scattered colored light across the pews. Judge Whitmore was already there, sitting in his wheelchair in the front row. He was alone, looking up at the crucifix above the altar. He turned when he heard them enter. "Miss Thompson." "Mr. Thompson. Thank you for coming." "Thank you for being here," Amara said. They sat together in that quiet chapel, an unlikely trio, a judge, a mechanic, and a 13-year-old girl. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy with expectation, with hope, with fear. Finally, Judge Whitmore broke the silence. "I don't know why I'm here," he admitted. "Part of me thinks this is foolish. That I'm setting myself up for disappointment. But another part of me, a part one thought had died years ago, wants to believe. Needs to believe. That there's more to this world than what we can see and measure and prove." "There is," Amara said with certainty. "I know there is. Because I've lived it." "Then show me," the judge said. "Show me what faith looks like." Amara stood and walked to where the judge sat. She knelt beside his wheelchair so she could look him in the eyes. "Before I pray, I need to ask you something. Do you want to be healed?" The judge looked confused. "Of course I do. Why would you ask that?" "Because sometimes," Amara said carefully, "we get comfortable with our pain. We build our identity around it. We let it define us. And the thought of losing it, even though it hurts, is scary because we don't know who will be without it. So I need to know, if God heals you tonight, are you ready to walk into a different life? Are you ready to be a different person?" The judge was silent for a long time, considering. "I think," he said slowly, "I've been angry at God for 7 years. Angry for not healing me when I begged. Angry for not answering my prayers. Angry for letting me suffer while people I considered less deserving went about their lives whole and healthy. That anger has been my companion, my fuel, my excuse for being hard and cold and unmerciful." He paused, his voice breaking slightly. "If he heals me now, I'll have to let that anger go. I'll have to admit I was wrong. I'll have to forgive him, forgive myself, forgive everyone I've blamed. And yes, that's terrifying. But yes, I'm ready. I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of being broken. I want to be whole again, even if it means becoming someone I don't recognize. Amara nodded. Then let's pray. She placed her small hands on the judge's legs, on knees that hadn't felt touch in 7 years. Eli came and stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. And Amara began to pray. Not in the formal, rehearsed language of written prayers, but in the simple, honest words of a child talking to a parent. God, I don't know all the right words to say. I don't know the theology or the doctrine or the proper way to do this. But I know you're real. I know you hear me. And I know you love Judge Whitmore even more than I do. He's been hurt. His body's been hurt, but his heart's been hurt worse. He stopped believing you cared about him. He stopped believing in miracles. But you brought us together for a reason. You put this promise in my heart for a reason. So I'm asking you, please, heal him. Not just his legs, but his heart. His faith. His hope. Remind him that you're still there. That you always were. That you never abandoned him, even when he felt most alone. As she prayed, something changed in the chapel. The air felt different, charged with an energy that had no name. The colored light from the stained glass seemed brighter. And Judge Harold Whitmore, who had spent 7 years feeling nothing below his waist, felt warmth. It started as a tingling sensation, faint at first, like the feeling of a limb waking up after falling asleep. Judge Whitmore's eyes widened. I feel something, he whispered. Amara kept praying, her eyes closed, her hands still on his legs. The warmth spread, moving down from his hips to his thighs, to his knees, to his calves. It wasn't painful exactly, but it was intense. Years of numbness being replaced by sensation all at once. It felt like fire and ice and electricity all combined. I feel it, the judge said louder, his voice filled with disbelief. I can feel your hands. I can feel, he stopped, staring down at his legs. His right foot had moved. Just a twitch, barely noticeable, but it had moved. He tried to do it again, focusing all his will on that foot. And it moved again, this time more deliberately. Oh my God, he breathed. Oh my God. Amara opened her eyes. Tears were streaming down her face. Can you feel this? She asked, pressing gently on his knee. Yes, the judge said, his voice breaking. Yes, I can feel it. Eli was crying too, watching something that shouldn't be possible unfold before his eyes. The judge gripped the arms of his wheelchair. I need to stand, he said. I need to try. Wait, Amara said. Your body hasn't supported weight in 7 years. Your muscles have atrophied. Even if the nerves are working, you need to be careful. But the judge wasn't listening. He was beyond caution, beyond reason. He placed his feet flat on the floor, something he hadn't been able to do in years. He felt the cold marble through his socks. He could feel it. He pushed against the armrests, trying to lift himself. His legs shook violently. His knees buckled. He fell back into the wheelchair, breathing hard. I can't, he said, frustration and disappointment flooding his voice. I thought, you're trying to do in 30 seconds what takes physical therapy patients months, Amara said. The feeling is back. That's the miracle. The strength will come. But the judge tried again. And again he fell. On the third attempt, Eli stepped forward. Let me help. He positioned himself in front of the judge, offering his hands. Hold on to me. Let me take some of your weight. The judge grasped Eli's hands, these hands that had been wrongly accused of negligence, these hands that belonged to a man he had sent to prison unjustly. And with Eli's support, with Amara's prayers, Judge Harold Whitmore rose from his wheelchair. His legs trembled like newborn foal's legs. Every muscle screamed in protest. But he was standing. For the first time in 7 years, he was on his feet. "I'm standing," he said, wonder filling his voice. "I'm actually standing." "You're standing," Eli confirmed, tears running down his own face. They stood there for a moment, frozen in time, a tableau of impossible grace, a judge being held up by the man he had wronged, supported by the faith of a child who had refused to stop believing. Then the judge took a step. It was clumsy, awkward. His left leg barely moved, dragging slightly. But it moved. He took another step, leaning heavily on Eli. Then another. They walked together down the center aisle of the chapel, slow and unsteady, but walking nonetheless. The judge was crying openly now, great heaving sobs of relief and joy and disbelief. "It's impossible," he kept saying. "It's impossible, but it's happening." They reached the back of the chapel and turned around. The return trip was slightly easier, the judge's muscles beginning to remember something they had forgotten, the neural pathways reconnecting after years of silence. When they reached the front again, the judge released Eli's hands. He stood alone, swaying but upright. "I'm standing by myself," he said, looking at his legs as if they belonged to someone else. "I'm actually standing by myself." He took one careful step without support. Then another. Then he looked at Amara, this small girl who had promised the impossible and delivered it, and he fell to his knees. Not because his legs gave out, but because he chose to kneel. "Forgive me," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Forgive me for being so blind. For being so hard. For sending your father to prison. For doubting you. For doubting everything." Amara knelt beside him. "There's nothing to forgive. You did what you thought was right. And in the end, you chose justice over pride. That's what matters." "But I cost your father 3 years," the judge said. 3 years you can never get back. And you gave him his freedom when you didn't have to," Amara countered. "You could have denied the petition. You could have protected the system. But you chose truth instead. That takes courage." The judge looked at her, this extraordinary child who had somehow become his teacher. "How did you do it? How did you heal me?" "I didn't," Amara said simply. "God did. I just asked. I just believed it was possible. The power was never mine." They stayed in that chapel for another hour, the judge practicing walking, getting stronger with each attempt. His muscles were weak, his gait unsteady, but he was walking. Actually walking. Before they left, the judge knelt again, this time at the altar, and prayed for the first time in years with actual faith instead of bitter ritual. He thanked God for the healing. He asked forgiveness for his years of anger. And he made a vow that he would spend the rest of his life, his walking life, pursuing real justice, not just legal procedure. When they finally emerged from the chapel into the evening air, the world looked different to all three of them. Amara felt lighter, as if a burden she hadn't known she was carrying had been lifted. Eli looked at his daughter with new wonder, finally understanding that she was meant for something greater than either of them had imagined. And Judge Harold Whitmore walked, slowly and carefully, down the church steps, taking his first steps into a new life. News of Judge Whitmore's healing spread like wildfire. At first, he tried to keep it quiet, knowing how it would sound. A judge healed by prayer? The media would have a field day. Skeptics would demand explanations. His colleagues would question his judgment. But secrets like that don't keep. Someone at the courthouse noticed he was walking. Then someone else. Then a court reporter asked directly, and Judge Whitmore, who had spent his career demanding truth from others, found he couldn't lie. "Yes," he confirmed. "I can walk again. I was healed through prayer by Amara Thompson, the same girl whose father I had wrongly convicted." The story exploded across local news, then state news, then national news. Judge healed by prayer. Girl's faith restores paralyzed judge. Miracle in the courtroom. The headlines were sensational, some reverent, some skeptical, all fascinated. Medical experts were brought in to examine the judge. They confirmed that his paralysis had been real, the result of severe spinal cord damage from his stroke. They also confirmed that he could now walk, with improving strength and coordination. How? They had no explanation. Spontaneous recovery from this kind of injury after 7 years is unprecedented, one neurologist said on camera. I can't explain it medically. The damage was documented. It was real. And now it's gone. Skeptics argued it must have been psychosomatic, that the paralysis was never real despite all the medical records proving otherwise. Others suggested fraud, though no one could explain what the judge or Amara had to gain from such a deception. Religious groups held up the story as proof of God's existence. Atheist organizations argued it proved nothing, that unexplained medical recoveries happen without divine intervention. Everyone had an opinion. But Judge Harold Whitmore didn't care what people thought. He knew what had happened. He knew what he had felt. And he knew his life had been fundamentally changed. 2 weeks after the healing, the state appellate court issued their decision on Eli Thompson's case. Based on the new evidence presented and Judge Whitmore's strong recommendation, Eli's conviction was overturned. The charges were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never be brought again. Eli Thompson was officially exonerated. The state attorney general also announced an investigation into Victor Crane and the Riverside factory fire. Within 3 months, enough evidence had been gathered to charge Crane with insurance fraud, criminal negligence, and obstruction of justice. He eventually pleaded guilty to avoid trial and served 2 years in prison, a fraction of what Eli had suffered, but at least some measure of justice. The insurance company sued Crane to recover the fraudulent payout. The civil suit bankrupted him. The powerful businessman who had destroyed an innocent man's life to protect his profits ended up losing everything. Eli Thompson received a settlement from the state for wrongful imprisonment. It wasn't enough to compensate for 3 stolen years, but it was enough to buy a better house, to ensure Amara could go to college, to give them a fresh start. Judge Harold Whitmore resigned from the bench 6 months after his healing. Not in disgrace, but by choice. I've spent too long behind that bench looking down at people, he said in his resignation letter. It's time I walked among them instead. He used his savings and his legal expertise to found a non-profit legal clinic providing free representation to people who couldn't afford lawyers. He called it Second Chance Legal Services. The first person he hired was Amara's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, to run the office. The second was Marcus Webb, who had testified against his own interests to tell the truth. He hired investigators and social workers and built a team dedicated to finding cases like Eli's, people wrongly convicted or trapped in a system that didn't serve justice. Amara was invited to speak at churches, at schools, at conferences. Everyone wanted to hear from the girl who had healed a judge. But she always deflected the attention. I didn't heal anyone, she would say. God did. I just asked. Anyone can ask. You don't need special powers. You just need faith. She finished school, graduated at the top of her class despite having missed so much during the years she was fighting for her father. Colleges offered her scholarships. Everyone wanted the girl who had worked miracles. She chose to study law, wanting to follow in Judge Whitmore's new footsteps, to be a voice for the voiceless. Her father was so proud he cried when she told him. Your mother would have been so proud too, he said. She knew you were special. She always knew. As Amara prepared to leave for college, she and her father stood in their new house, a modest but solid place with a roof that didn't leak and a stove that worked. It was more than they had ever had before. You did this, Eli said, gesturing around them. You saved me. You saved us. We saved each other, Amara corrected. You taught me to have faith. You showed me what love looks like. You never gave up on being good even when the world was cruel. I just did what you would have done for me. I'm not sure about that, Eli said with a smile. I don't think I could have stood up to a judge and promised to heal him. Amara laughed. That was a little crazy, wasn't it? Completely crazy, Eli agreed. And absolutely perfect. 5 years passed. Amara graduated from law school and joined Second Chance Legal Services, working alongside Judge Whitmore, who insisted she call him Harold now. Together they freed 6 wrongly convicted people in her first 2 years of practice. Eli worked as a consultant for the nonprofit, using his mechanical expertise to help with investigations involving industrial accidents and equipment failures. Mrs. Chen retired but stayed involved, making sure everyone in the office ate lunch and took breaks. The original story became legend. People still talked about the girl who healed the judge, though with each retelling the facts got more distorted, more exaggerated. Some versions had Amara laying hands on the judge in the courtroom. Others had light shining from heaven. One particularly creative version involved angels. Amara found it amusing and frustrating in equal measure. The truth was spectacular enough, she would tell people. Why does everyone feel the need to embellish? But she understood. People needed hope. They needed to believe that impossible things could still happen, that the powerful could be held accountable, that faith still mattered in a cynical world. If her story gave them that, she supposed the embellishments didn't hurt. Judge Whitmore, or Harold as he now insisted, never fully recovered his pre-stroke physical condition. He walked with a slight limp. His left side was weaker than his right. But he walked. And more importantly, he had become a different person. The hard, cold judge was gone, replaced by a man whose compassion matched his intelligence. One evening, Amara and Harold were working late at the office, reviewing a case about a man who had been convicted based solely on a coerced confession. The evidence was flimsy, the timeline impossible, but the man had been in prison for 8 years. This could be our next Eli Thompson, Harold said, studying the files. If we can get the confession suppressed, the whole case falls apart. Then we'll get it suppressed, Amara said with the same certainty she had brought to every challenge. Harold smiled at her. You know, when you first walked into my courtroom, I thought you were just another desperate person who couldn't accept reality. I had no idea you would change my life completely. I didn't change your life, Amara said. God did. I was just the messenger. A very persistent messenger, Harold noted. You wouldn't take no for an answer. Neither would you, in the end, Amara pointed out. You could have denied the habeas petition. You could have protected your pride. But you chose justice instead. Because you showed me what justice really looks like, Harold said. Not rules and procedures, but people. Real people with real lives who deserve real chances. I had forgotten that. Or maybe I never really learned it in the first place. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, 2 people from completely different worlds brought together by circumstances that neither could have predicted. Finally, Amara spoke. Can I ask you something I've always wondered? That day in the chapel, when you felt the healing start, what did you think? Harold considered the question carefully. Honestly? My first thought was terror. Because if this was real, if God was real and listening and capable of miracles, then I had been wrong about everything. Wrong about how the world worked. Wrong about what mattered. Wrong about who I was. And facing that was more frightening than staying paralyzed. But you accepted it anyway, Amara said. I didn't have much choice, Harold laughed. Hard to deny something when you're standing for the first time in 7 years. But yes, I accepted it. And accepting it meant accepting that there's more to this universe than what I can see and control and understand. It meant surrendering my certainty that I had it all figured out. That was harder than learning to walk again. Do you regret it? Amara asked. Regret the healing? Regret everything that came after? Never, Harold said immediately. Not for a single moment. That night in the chapel, I didn't just get my legs back. I got my humanity back. My faith. My purpose. Everything I had lost by being bitter and angry and closed off. You gave me that. God gave you that, Amara corrected gently. I was just the kid who wouldn't shut up until you listened. Harold laughed, a sound that still surprised him sometimes. There had been so little laughter in his life before. The most persistent kid I ever met. And thank God for that. The case they were working on that evening eventually went to trial. Amara argued before a judge she once would have found intimidating, but after standing up to Harold Whitmore in his angriest days, other judges seemed less scary. She presented the evidence of the coerced confession, showed the timeline inconsistencies, demonstrated reasonable doubt. The conviction was overturned. Another innocent man walked free. The local newspaper ran a story about Second Chance Legal Services and their growing track record of exonerations. They interviewed Amara, now 23, and already making a name for herself in legal circles. What drives you? The reporter asked. What makes you take on these impossible cases that other lawyers won't touch? Amara thought about the question. She thought about her father, about 3 years stolen from his life. She thought about Judge Whitmore, about 7 years in a wheelchair. She thought about all the people trapped in a system that valued efficiency over truth, procedure over justice. I guess I believe in second chances, she said finally. I believe that no mistake is final, no situation is hopeless, and no person is beyond redemption. I've seen too many miracles to believe otherwise. Speaking of miracles, the reporter said, people still talk about what happened with Judge Whitmore. Do you consider yourself a healer? No, Amara said firmly. I'm not a healer. I'm just someone who believes in asking for help from a source bigger than myself. Anyone can do that. You don't need special powers. You just need faith and the courage to ask. But not everyone who asks receives, the reporter pointed out. True, Amara acknowledged. I don't understand why some prayers are answered and others aren't. I don't understand the theology of it. But I know that faith itself is healing, even when it doesn't change our circumstances. Having hope, believing in something beyond ourselves, refusing to give up, that itself is powerful. That itself makes a difference. The interview ran with a photo of Amara standing in front of the Second Chance Legal Services building, her father and Harold on either side of her. The headline read, The Power of Persistence, How Faith and Facts Work Together for Justice. The story was picked up nationally. Amara received letters from around the country, from people who had been inspired by her story, from lawyers who wanted to volunteer at Second Chance, from families of the wrongly convicted begging for help. Each letter was answered. Each case was reviewed. Not all could be taken on, there were only so many hours in the day, so many resources available. But each person was heard. Each story was acknowledged. No one was dismissed. Because Amara remembered what it felt like to be a desperate 13-year-old girl knocking on doors that wouldn't open, calling numbers that went to voicemail, being told by everyone that her father's case was closed and there was nothing to be done. She would never let someone feel that way if she could help it. One day, a letter arrived from an unlikely source, Victor Crane. He was out of prison now, living quietly in a different state, working a modest job, his fortune gone, his reputation destroyed. The letter was brief, Miss Thompson, I know no apology can undo the harm I caused your family. I know I can never repay the years your father lost because of my greed and cowardice. But I wanted you to know that what happened taught me something I should have learned long ago, that people matter more than profit. That truth matters more than reputation. That doing right matters more than coming out ahead. I'm sorry. I know those words mean little. But they're true. And I wanted you to hear them. Amara showed the letter to her father. What do you think? She asked. Eli read it slowly, his expression unreadable. I think, he said finally, that even Victor Crane deserves a second chance at being human. Should I write back? Eli nodded. Tell him we forgive him. Not because he deserves it, but because carrying hatred is too heavy a burden. And we've carried enough burdens. So Amara wrote back, a short letter offering forgiveness and wishing him well. She didn't know if it would mean anything to Crane. But it meant something to her and her father to let it go, to release the last bit of bitterness that might have taken root. 10 years after that night in the chapel, on the anniversary of the healing, Amara, Eli, and Harold returned to St. Mary's. It had become their tradition, meeting there each year to remember what had happened, to give thanks, to reflect on how far they had come. The chapel looked the same, still beautiful in its faded way, still peaceful in a world that seemed increasingly chaotic. They sat together in the front pew, three people whose lives had been impossibly intertwined. 10 years, Harold said, shaking his head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Both, Eli agreed. It's both. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Amara spoke. I've been thinking about that day a lot lately. About how scared I was. About how impossible it seemed. About how I almost gave up 100 times but something kept pushing me forward. Faith, Harold said. That's what faith is. It's not the absence of doubt. It's moving forward despite the doubt. Is that what you learned? Amara asked him. Among other things, Harold said. I learned that being right about the law and being right about justice aren't always the same thing. I learned that power without compassion is just cruelty with a gavel. I learned that sometimes the people we dismiss, the people we think don't matter, are the ones who have the most important things to teach us. He looked at Amara. You were 13 years old. You had no power, no money, no credentials. By every measure that mattered in my courtroom, you were nobody. And you changed my life more profoundly than anyone with power ever could have. I wasn't nobody, Amara said softly. I was somebody's daughter. And that was enough. Eli put his arm around her. That's always been enough. They prayed together then, the three of them, thanking God for second chances, for healing both seen and unseen, for justice delayed but not denied. As they were leaving, a young woman approached them hesitantly. She looked to be in her early 20s, thin, anxious, holding a folder of papers. Excuse me, she said. Are you Amara Thompson? The lawyer? I am, Amara said kindly. How can I help you? My brother, the young woman said, her voice breaking. He's in prison for something he didn't do. I've tried everything. No one will listen. But I heard about you. About what? My brother, the young woman said, her voice breaking. He's in prison for something he didn't do. I've tried everything. No one will listen. But I heard about you. About what you did for your father. About how you never gave up. And I thought maybe you could help me. Or at least tell me how to fight when everyone says there's nothing I can do. Amara looked at this young woman, saw herself at 13 standing in a courthouse with nothing but determination and a prayer. She saw the desperation in her eyes, the exhaustion in her posture, the folder clutched so tightly her knuckles were white. Harold and Eli stood back, watching, knowing this moment belonged to Amara. What's your name? Amara asked gently. Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. Sarah, why don't you come with us? We're heading back to our office. You can tell me about your brother there. We'll look at what you have, and we'll see what can be done. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Really? You'll actually look at his case? I'll look at every case, Amara said. I can't promise we can take it on. We're already handling a lot. But I promise someone will review what you have. Someone will listen. You're not alone in this fight anymore. Sarah started crying in earnest then, relief flooding through her. Thank you. Thank you so much. You don't know what this means. I do know, Amara said quietly. I know exactly what it means. Because I've been where you are. And someone gave me a chance when they didn't have to. Now it's my turn to do the same. They walked together back to the Second Chance Legal Services office, Sarah talking rapidly about her brother's case, about the evidence that didn't add up, about the witnesses who weren't called, about the public defender who barely tried. Amara listened, asked questions, took mental notes. At the office, she gave Sarah's information to one of their investigators. "Start with this," she told him. "Let's see what we're dealing with." After Sarah left, promising to send over all her documentation, Eli looked at his daughter with pride. "She reminded me of you," he said. "All those years ago. That same desperate determination. That's why I couldn't turn her away," Amara said. "I remember how it felt. I remember thinking I was completely alone, that no one in the world cared whether an innocent man rotted in prison. I can't let someone else feel that way if I can help it." "You can't save everyone," Harold reminded her gently. "I know," Amara said. "But I can try. I can listen. I can look at the evidence. And sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes just knowing someone believes you, someone is fighting with you, that's what gives people strength to keep going." Harold nodded, understanding. "That's what you gave me. Not just the healing, but the belief that someone cared enough to fight for what was right, even when it seemed impossible." Over the following months, Second Chance Legal Services reviewed Sarah Mitchell's brother's case. The investigation uncovered problems similar to those in Eli's case: rushed investigation, circumstantial evidence, inadequate defense. They took on the case. It took 2 years, but eventually, Sarah's brother was exonerated and released. Sarah came to work for Second Chance as a paralegal, wanting to help others the way she had been helped. The cycle continued. People helped people. Those who received justice became advocates for others seeking justice. The work spread beyond just criminal cases. Second Chance began helping with civil rights violations, with housing discrimination, with immigration issues. Anywhere someone was being crushed by a system too big and too impersonal, Second Chance tried to intervene. Amara couldn't be everywhere, couldn't help everyone. But she built a team of lawyers and advocates who shared her vision. She trained them not just in legal strategies but in compassion, in listening, in seeing the humanity in every client. "The law is important," she would tell new hires. "But people are more important. Never forget that behind every case number is a real person with a real life. Treat them the way you would want your family treated." The organization grew. Branch offices opened in other cities. More lawyers joined, inspired by the mission. Some came because of Amara's story, curious about the woman who had healed a judge. Others came because they had seen too many injustices and wanted to do something about it. Amara became a sought-after speaker. Law schools invited her to lecture. Churches asked her to share her testimony. Conferences wanted her perspective on faith and justice. She accepted some invitations, declined others. She never wanted the speaking to overshadow the work. "I'm not a motivational speaker," she told one organizer who offered her a substantial fee. "I'm a lawyer trying to do my job. If my story inspires people, great. But the real inspiration should be in the work itself, in seeing justice happen, in watching innocent people walk free." But she did speak sometimes, especially to young people. She would tell them about being 13 and scared and determined. She would tell them about standing up to a judge, about making a promise that seemed impossible, about refusing to quit when everyone said to give up. "You don't have to be special," she would say. "You don't need superpowers. You just need to care enough to try." That's all I did. I cared about my father. I believed in the truth. And I refused to accept that the system couldn't be challenged. If I could do that at 13 with no resources and no training, imagine what you can do. The message resonated. Young people wrote to her, inspired to pursue justice careers. Some became lawyers, others social workers, others activists. They carried forward the idea that one person with faith and determination could make a difference. Harold continued to walk, though his limp grew more pronounced as he aged. He never took it for granted. Every morning when he got out of bed and his feet touched the floor, he said a prayer of thanks. He remembered what it was like to be trapped, unable to move, bitter and angry. He never wanted to return to that emotional place again, even if his physical condition somehow regressed. When he turned 70, he finally fully retired from Second Chance, though he remained on the board and consulted on difficult cases. At his retirement party, surrounded by dozens of people whose lives he had touched, he gave a speech. "When I was in that wheelchair, I thought my life was over. I thought I knew everything about justice, about the law, about how the world worked. And then a 13-year-old girl walked into my courtroom and proved me wrong about everything. She showed me that I didn't know justice at all. I knew procedure. I knew precedent. But I didn't know mercy. I didn't know compassion. I didn't know what it meant to really fight for what was right instead of what was easy." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "Amara Thompson didn't just heal my legs. She healed my soul. She reminded me that we're put on this earth to help each other, to lift each other up, to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. And that's what we've tried to do here at Second Chance. We've tried to be what Amara was for her father, someone who refuses to give up, who believes in the impossible, who fights until justice is served." The room erupted in applause. Amara, sitting in the front row with tears streaming down her face, stood and hugged the man who had once been her adversary and had become her mentor, her friend, her example of what redemption looked like. Eli, now in his 60s, still worked part-time at Second Chance. He couldn't do the physical work he once did, but his experience with industrial equipment made him valuable in cases involving workplace accidents and safety violations. He had remarried, a kind woman named Grace who worked as a nurse and who understood about second chances because she was a widow herself, both of them building a new life from the pieces of loss. He and Grace had dinner with Amara every Sunday, a tradition they had maintained for years. Over pot roast or spaghetti or whatever Grace had cooked, they would talk about the week, about cases, about life. "You know," Eli said one Sunday evening, "I used to be angry about those 3 years. About the time stolen from me, from us. About missing watching you grow up. But now I wonder if it all happened for a reason." "What reason?" Amara asked, though she thought she knew. "So you could learn to fight," Eli said. "So you could develop this incredible determination. So you could help all these other people. If I hadn't been wrongly convicted, you wouldn't have become who you are. Second Chance wouldn't exist. All those people we've helped would still be in prison. That's a heavy price for a purpose," Grace observed. "Maybe too heavy," Eli acknowledged. "I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But since it happened, since we can't change it, I choose to believe there was meaning in it. That something good came from something terrible. That's faith," Amara said softly. "Believing that even our worst moments can be redeemed. That nothing is wasted. That God can use even our pain for something beautiful. Like he used your desperation to heal a bitter old judge," Eli smiled. "Exactly like that." They sat together in comfortable silence, 3 people who had survived the worst and found grace on the other side. Years continued to pass. Amara never married, though not for lack of options. She dated occasionally, but her work consumed her. "I'm married to justice," she would joke, though there was truth in it. The work was her calling, her purpose, her life. She didn't resent it. Some people were meant for family life. She was meant for this. On her 35th birthday, she took a day off, something she rarely did. She drove to the prison where her father had been held, the same prison she had visited every week for 3 years as a child. It looked different now. Or maybe she looked different. Everything seemed smaller, less intimidating. She stood outside the fence, remembering the girl who had made this trip so many times, clutching bus fare in her pocket, hope and desperation warring in her heart. A security guard approached her. "Can I help you, ma'am?" No, thank you, Amara said. I'm just remembering. Remembering what? Being powerless, Amara said. And learning that I wasn't. The guard looked confused but nodded and walked away, leaving her to her thoughts. That night, Amara did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled out her old notebook, the one where she had written all her notes about her father's case. She flipped through pages of her teenage handwriting, saw the names and dates and evidence she had so painstakingly compiled. At the back of the notebook, she found something she had forgotten about, a letter she had written to herself after her father was freed. Dear future me, it read. If you're reading this, then time has passed and maybe you've forgotten what this felt like. So I'm writing this to remind you, remember how impossible it seemed. Remember how many people said it couldn't be done. Remember how scared you were. Remember making that promise to Judge Whitmore, a promise you had no idea how to keep. Remember praying in an empty house, wondering if God was listening. Remember the day Dad came home. Remember Judge Whitmore standing for the first time in 7 years. Remember that miracles are real. Remember that one person can make a difference. Remember that faith is not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite the fear. And remember that you didn't do any of it alone. God was there. Dad was there in spirit even when he was locked away. Mrs. Chen was there. Marcus was there. Even Judge Whitmore, eventually, was there. You were never alone. So whatever you're facing now, whatever impossible thing is in front of you, remember, you've faced impossible before. And you won. Love, 13-year-old you. P.S. I hope you're happy. I hope Dad is happy. I hope we made a difference. That's all I ever wanted. Amara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Yes, she wanted to tell her younger self. Yes, we made a difference. More than you could have imagined. She pulled out a pen and wrote a response in the same notebook. Dear 13-year-old me, we did it. We did more than we dreamed. Dad is happy. He's remarried, working, free. Judge Whitmore walks. He spent 15 years helping people, fighting for justice. And me? I'm doing what you always wanted. I'm fighting for people who need someone to fight for them. We've freed 43 innocent people. 43. 43 families reunited. 43 lives restored. Because you wouldn't give up. Because you believed when no one else did. I want you to know something, you were stronger than you knew. Braver than you felt. More powerful than you imagined. And you were right. About everything. About Dad being innocent. About miracles being possible. About faith moving mountains. You were right, and the world was wrong, and you proved it. I'm proud of you. I hope you know that. I hope wherever you are in time, in memory, in the past that led to this present, you know that you did good. You did so much good. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for being brave when I couldn't be yet. Thank you for believing. Love, future you. P.S. We're happy. We made a difference. You got everything you ever wanted, even though it looked different than you imagined. She closed the notebook and put it away, feeling connected to her younger self across the years, across the struggle, across the miracle. 20 years after that night in the chapel, Amara received devastating news. Harold had suffered another stroke. This one was severe. The doctors said there was nothing they could do. He had days, maybe a week. Amara dropped everything and went to the hospital. Harold was in a private room, machines beeping steadily, his breathing labored. He looked old now, truly old, his body finally catching up with the years. But his eyes, when they opened and saw her, were clear. Amara, he whispered, his voice weak. I'm here, she said, taking his hand. I'm right here. Good, he breathed. Wanted to see you. Don't talk like that, Amara said, though she knew. She knew this was goodbye. Listen, Harold said, gathering strength. No regrets. 20 years walking. 20 years helping people. 20 years of purpose. That's a gift. That's more than I deserved. You deserved all of it, Amara said fiercely. You became the man you were meant to be. Because of you, Harold said. Because a little girl wouldn't take no for an answer. Because someone believed in miracles. He paused, breathing hard. Will you pray? Like you did that night? Amara nodded, unable to speak. She placed her hands on his, just as she had placed them on his legs 2 decades earlier, and she prayed. God, thank you for Harold. Thank you for healing him when he needed it most. Thank you for giving him 20 years to walk, to work, to serve. Thank you for making him my mentor, my friend, my example of what redemption looks like. And now, as he prepares to walk a different path, be with him. Let him go in peace. Let him know that his life mattered, that he made a difference, that he will be remembered not for his mistakes but for his transformation. Receive him with love. Receive him with grace. Receive him as your son, coming home. Harold's eyes closed, a small smile on his face. Thank you, he whispered. For everything. For my life. For my purpose. For teaching me what faith looks like. Thank you, Amara countered. For giving my father a chance. For believing. For becoming the man you were meant to be. They sat together in silence for a while. Then Harold opened his eyes one more time. Tell your father, he said, each word an effort, tell him I'm sorry. And grateful. And proud. I will, Amara promised. He knows. But I'll tell him. Harold nodded, satisfied. One more thing. Keep fighting. Keep believing. Keep showing people that miracles are real. Promise me. I promise, Amara said, tears streaming down her face. Good, Harold said. And then, with a final breath, with peace on his face, Judge Harold Whitmore went home. The funeral was held at St. Mary's Chapel, the place where Harold had first walked again, the place he had returned to every year to remember and give thanks. The chapel was packed. Lawyers and judges and former clients. People whose lives he had touched, whose cases he had championed, whose freedom he had fought for. Amara gave the eulogy. She stood at the front of the chapel, looking out at all these people, and told Harold's story. Not just the miracle of healing, but the deeper miracle of transformation. Harold Whitmore was not a perfect man, she began. He would be the first to tell you that. He made mistakes. He was hard where he should have been compassionate. He was blind where he should have seen. He sent innocent people to prison, including my father. But he was also a man capable of change. When confronted with truth, even uncomfortable truth, he had the courage to admit he was wrong. He had the strength to change. And he spent the last 20 years of his life making amends, fighting for the people he once judged too harshly. She paused, collecting herself. 20 years ago, I made him a promise. I promised that if he freed my father, I would heal him. And people remember that as some kind of miracle story. The paralyzed judge who walked again. And yes, that was miraculous. But the real miracle wasn't his legs. The real miracle was his heart. The real miracle was watching a bitter, angry man become compassionate and kind. Watching someone who had lost faith find it again. Watching someone transform from a person who upheld the law into a person who pursued justice. That transformation, that change of heart, that was the real miracle. And it didn't happen in one night in a chapel. It happened over 20 years of choosing, every day, to be better than he had been the day before. She looked around the chapel, at all the faces. That's what Harold taught me. That we're not defined by our worst moments. We're defined by what we do after them. Do we make excuses? Do we defend ourselves? Do we blame others? Or do we have the courage to say, I was wrong, and I'm going to do better? Harold chose the latter. And in doing so, he helped 43 innocent people walk free. He mentored dozens of young lawyers. He changed the legal landscape in this state. He left the world better than he found it. And that, ultimately, is all any of us can hope to do. Amara's voice broke. I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss his wisdom, his dry humor, his complete inability to give up on a case once he believed in it. I'm going to miss having coffee with him every Monday morning, reviewing the week ahead. I'm going to miss calling him when I'm stuck on a legal question. I'm going to miss knowing he's there, this steady presence, this reminder that change is possible. She wiped her eyes. But I take comfort in knowing that he died the way he wanted to live, with purpose, with peace, with the knowledge that his life mattered. He walked for 20 years that doctors said were impossible. He helped people for 20 years who others said were beyond help. He proved, every single day, that miracles don't just happen once. They happen every time we choose love over hate, truth over convenience, justice over ease. Harold Whitmore was a walking miracle. And his legacy will walk on through everyone he taught, everyone he helped, everyone he inspired. The congregation rose in standing ovation, an unusual thing at a funeral, but fitting. Harold had been an unusual man. After the service, people lingered, sharing stories. One man told how Harold had freed him after 12 years of wrongful imprisonment. A woman described how Harold had helped her win a discrimination case when no one else would take it. A young lawyer tearfully recounted how Harold had mentored her, believed in her when she doubted herself. Story after story, life after life touched. Eli stood with Amara, his arm around his daughter. He was a good man, Eli said simply. Yes, Amara agreed. He was. And we helped make him that way, in a sense. Our story was part of his transformation. Your story, Eli corrected gently. You were the one with faith. I was just the grateful beneficiary. No, Amara said firmly. It was always our story. Yours and mine and Harold's and God's. All of us together, creating something none of us could have done alone. After Harold's death, Amara faced a decision. Second Chance Legal Services had been his vision as much as hers. Could she continue it without him? Should she? She spent weeks in contemplation, praying, thinking, remembering. One night, she returned to St. Mary's Chapel alone. She sat in the front pew where she had sat so many times with Harold and her father, and she spoke to God. I don't know if I can do this without him, she said aloud, her voice echoing in the empty chapel. He was my mentor, my guide. He knew things I'm still learning. How am I supposed to lead Second Chance without him? She waited in the silence, half hoping for an answer, half knowing none would come in words. But then she remembered something Harold had told her years ago, you don't need to know everything. You just need to know the next right thing to do. Do that, and then the next thing will become clear. The next right thing. What was the next right thing? She thought about the cases waiting on her desk. About the people calling for help. About Sarah Mitchell, who now ran the intake department, screening new cases. About the team of lawyers and investigators and paralegals who believed in the mission. The next right thing was to keep going. To honor Harold by continuing the work he had dedicated his final years to. To be for others what he had been for her, someone who believed in second chances. Amara stood, feeling resolve settle into her bones. She would continue. Second Chance would continue. And she would make sure Harold's legacy lived on in every person they helped, every case they won, every family they reunited. She expanded the organization. Opened new offices in 3 more states. Developed a training program for young lawyers who wanted to do justice work. Created a fellowship named after Harold Whitmore that paid public defenders to take on difficult cases. The work grew, but never lost its core purpose, helping people the system had forgotten. Her father, now in his 70s, officially retired but couldn't quite stay away. He volunteered at the office twice a week, making coffee, organizing files, talking to clients who needed someone to listen. "I can't do much anymore," he told Amara. "But I can be present. I can show people that someone cares. That's something." "That's everything," Amara corrected. "That's what changed our lives. Someone cared. Harold cared enough to reopen your case. I cared enough to fight. Mrs. Chin cared enough to help. Caring is how change happens." One afternoon, a teenager came into the Second Chance office. She was maybe 14, skinny, nervous, clutching a folder of papers. She asked to speak with Amara Thompson. Sarah Mitchell, remembering her own desperate visit years earlier, immediately brought the girl to Amara's office. "Hi," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Jasmine. My mom is in prison. She didn't do what they said she did. I've tried to help her, but nobody listens to me. I'm just a kid. But then I heard about you. About how you saved your dad when you were my age. And I thought maybe you could help me save my mom." Amara looked at this girl, saw herself at 13, and felt the circle complete. She had been this girl. And now she was the person this girl needed. "Jasmine," she said gently, "sit down. Tell me about your mom. Tell me everything. And I promise you, someone is listening now. You're not alone anymore." As Jasmine began to talk, hesitantly at first but then with growing confidence, Amara caught her father's eye through the office window. He was smiling, tears on his cheeks, watching his daughter be for someone else what she had once needed herself. This, Amara realized, was the real legacy. Not the miracle in the chapel, though that was part of it. Not the cases won or the people freed, though those mattered immensely. The real legacy was the chain of caring. Someone caring enough to help, then that person helping the next person, who helps the next. An unbreaking chain of compassion stretching forward into a future where justice wasn't just a word but a reality accessible to everyone, regardless of wealth or power or status. "Tell me about your mom," Amara said again to Jasmine. "Start at the beginning. I have time." And she did have time. She would make time. Because that's what Harold had taught her. That's what her father had shown her. That's what faith looked like in action, making time for people who mattered, which was everyone. 5 years after Harold's death, on what would have been his 80th birthday, Second Chance Legal Services held a symposium in his honor. Lawyers and judges and activists from across the country gathered to discuss wrongful convictions, legal reform, and the intersection of faith and justice. Amara was asked to give the keynote address. She stood before an audience of hundreds, many of whom knew her story, many of whom didn't. She told them about being 13 and desperate. About making an impossible promise. About the night in the chapel that changed 3 lives forever. But then she went deeper. "People often ask me how I knew," she said. "How I knew that Harold would walk again. How I could promise something so impossible with such certainty. And the truth is, I didn't know. Not in the way we usually think of knowing. I didn't have a vision. I didn't hear a voice from heaven. I didn't have any special revelation. What I had was faith. But let me tell you what faith really is, because I think we misunderstand it." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Faith isn't certainty. It's not knowing something will happen. It's choosing to believe something can happen, and then acting on that belief even when you have no proof, no guarantee, no assurance of success. Faith is taking the first step when you can't see the whole staircase. Faith is making a promise you have no idea how to keep because you trust that somehow, someway, it will be kept. When I told Judge Whitmore that I would heal him, I had no plan. I had no medical knowledge. I had nothing but a desperate belief that God could do something I couldn't. And that's what faith always is, acknowledging our powerlessness while trusting in a power greater than ourselves. She looked out at the audience. But here's what I've learned in the 25 years since that night: faith without action is just wishful thinking. I didn't just pray for Harold to be healed. I fought for my father's freedom. I gathered evidence. I filed legal documents. I tracked down witnesses. I did everything humanly possible, and then I asked God to do what was humanly impossible. That's the partnership. We do what we can. God does what we can't. But we have to do our part first. She told them about the 43 people Second Chance had freed. About Jasmine's mother, who had been exonerated 2 years ago. About the countless other cases they had taken on, some successful, some not. We don't win every case, she admitted. Sometimes the evidence isn't there. Sometimes the system is too entrenched. Sometimes we're just too late. And that's hard. That's really hard. Because every case is a person, a life, a family. Every loss feels personal. But here's what I hold on to: every time we fight, even when we lose, we're saying that people matter. We're saying that justice isn't just for those who can afford it. We're saying that no one is disposable, no one is forgotten, no one is beyond hope. And that message, that act of resistance against a system that wants to grind people up and spit them out, that matters even when we don't win. She paused, emotion creeping into her voice. Harold used to say that justice isn't a destination. It's a direction. We're always moving toward it, even if we never fully arrive. Every person freed is a step in the right direction. Every wrongful conviction overturned is progress. Every family reunited is a victory. And the cumulative effect of all those small victories, all those steps in the right direction, that's how we change the world. So if you're in this room and you're wondering if your work matters, if you're feeling discouraged by how slow change is, if you're tempted to give up because the problems seem too big and you seem too small, let me tell you what a judge once told me: do the next right thing. Just the next right thing. Don't worry about solving everything. Don't worry about being powerful enough or smart enough or having all the answers. Just do the next right thing in front of you. For me, at 13, the next right thing was gathering evidence. Then filing a petition. Then showing up to court. Then praying in a chapel. I didn't have a master plan. I just kept doing the next right thing, and somehow, impossibly, it was enough. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. And here's the final thing I want to leave you with: miracles are real. They happen. But they don't usually look like we expect. The miracle wasn't just Harold walking. The miracle was Harold changing. The miracle was a system designed to protect power being forced to pursue justice instead. The miracle was 3 broken people becoming whole together. The miracle was learning that love is stronger than law, that truth is more powerful than procedure, that faith can indeed move mountains if we're willing to start with pebbles. Look for miracles in your work. Not just the big, flashy ones, though those happen too. But the small ones. The client who finally smiles. The witness who decides to tell the truth. The judge who rules fairly despite pressure to do otherwise. The family that stays together through the fight. Those are miracles too. And if we're paying attention, we'll see them everywhere. She concluded with a challenge: go forth and fight. Fight for justice. Fight for truth. Fight for people who can't fight for themselves. And when it seems impossible, when you want to quit, when everyone tells you it can't be done, remember a 13-year-old girl with no power and no resources who refused to accept that her father belonged in prison. Remember that she changed the world, one case at a time, one person at a time, one act of faith at a time. And if she could do it, so can you. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. People were crying, inspired, ready to return to their work with renewed purpose. Amara watched them and thought about how stories spread, how one act of faith could ripple out across years and miles, touching people she would never meet, inspiring fights she would never see. This, she realized, was the true miracle. Not just what happened in that chapel 25 years ago, but what was still happening now. The ripples spreading outward, creating more ripples, an endless cascade of faith and action and change. Late that evening, after the symposium ended and the crowds dispersed, Amara returned to her office alone. She sat at her desk, looking at the photos on the wall. Her father at his release. Harold taking his first steps. The second chance team. Dozens of clients, freed, smiling, whole again. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, tired from the long day, but something made her pick up. Hello. Ms. Thompson. You don't know me, but my name is David. David Whitmore. I'm Harold's son. Amara sat up straight. She had known Harold had a son from a previous marriage, estranged for many years. They had never reconciled. David, she said. I'm so sorry for your loss. I know you and your father we weren't close, David interrupted. He left my mother when I was young. I blamed him for a lot. I didn't go to his funeral. I was still too angry. I understand, Amara said, though she felt sad for Harold, for this relationship never repaired. But I've been doing some thinking, David continued. And I've been reading about the work he did. About Second Chance. About all the people he helped. And I realized I only knew one version of my father. The man who left. The man who disappointed me. But there was another version. The man he became. The man you knew. He was a good man, Amara said softly. At the end. He became a very good man. That's what I'm calling about, David said. I want to make a donation to Second Chance. In his memory. I can't undo the years we lost. I can't tell him I'm proud of who he became. But I can support the work that mattered to him. Would that be okay? Amara felt tears spring to her eyes. That would be more than okay. That would honor him deeply. They talked for a while longer, David asking questions about his father's work, about the people he had helped, about the man he had been in these final years. Amara told him stories, painted a picture of Harold's transformation, his dedication, his growth. Thank you, David said finally. For giving him a purpose. For helping him become someone I could have been proud of. I just wish I had known him this way. He understood why you stayed away, Amara said. He told me once that he didn't blame you for being angry. That he had failed as a father and he accepted the consequences. But he never stopped loving you. I want you to know that. David was quiet for a moment. I needed to hear that. Thank you. After the call ended, Amara sat in the dark office, thinking about redemption. About how it's never too late for someone to change. About how change can ripple forward even after death, healing wounds that seemed permanent. Her father called. How did the symposium go? Good, Amara said. Really good. People were inspired. And Dad? Harold's son called. He's making a donation. That's wonderful, Eli said. Harold would have been so happy. I think he knows, Amara said. Wherever he is, I think he knows. They chatted for a few more minutes, the comfortable conversation of family who had been through fire together and come out stronger. After hanging up, Amara did one more thing before leaving the office. She opened her email and found a draft she had been working on. It was a letter to Jasmine, the girl whose mother they had just freed. She finished it and hit send. Dear Jasmine, your mother is coming home. The judge signed the order today. Dear Jasmine, your mother is coming home. The judge signed the order today. She'll be released tomorrow morning. I wanted you to hear it from me first, before the official notification arrives. You did this. Yes, we helped with the legal work, but you're the one who refused to give up. You're the one who fought when everyone said it was hopeless. You're the one who believed your mother deserved justice. And you were right. I know these last 2 years have been hard. I know you've sacrificed a lot, missed school activities to attend hearings, spent weekends helping us prepare instead of being with friends. I know you felt alone sometimes, even with us helping. But you kept going. Just like I did for my father. Just like someone will do for someone else because you showed them it's possible. That's how change happens, Jasmine. One person refusing to quit. One person believing when no one else does. One person standing up and saying, this is wrong, and I'm going to make it right. You're that person for your mother. And someday, you'll be that person for someone else. Because once you've fought this fight, once you've seen that the impossible is actually possible, you can't go back to accepting injustice. You'll spend the rest of your life fighting it, in whatever way you can. Welcome your mother home tomorrow. Hold her tight. Tell her everything you couldn't say through prison glass. And then, when you're ready, when enough time has passed and you've healed together, remember this feeling. Remember what it took to get here. And use it. Use it to fuel whatever fight comes next. Because there will be another fight. There always is. But now you know you can win. With love and respect, Amara. P.S. My father wants me to tell you that he's proud of you. He said you remind him of me. I told him that's the best compliment anyone could give. She hit send and felt a sense of completion wash over her. The circle continued. She had been Jasmine. Harold had been the person who helped her. Now she was the person helping Jasmine. And someday, Jasmine would help someone else. Infinite ripples of faith and action spreading across time. Amara turned off her office light and locked the door. As she walked to her car through the quiet parking lot, she looked up at the stars and said a simple prayer, thank you. For everything. For my father. For Harold. For all the people we've helped. For this work. For this life. For teaching me that faith without action is empty, but action with faith is miraculous. Keep guiding us. Keep using us. And help us never forget that every person matters, every story deserves to be heard, and every injustice demands a response. Amen. She drove home through streets she had walked as a desperate 13-year-old, past the old house where she and her father had struggled, past the courthouse where she had made an impossible promise, past St. Mary's Chapel where that promise had been kept. Everything looked different now. Or maybe she was different. Probably both. 3 years later, Amara received an invitation that surprised her. It was from Jasmine Mitchell, now 18 years old and about to graduate high school. You're invited to my graduation party, the invitation read. Please come. I have something important to tell you. Amara attended, bringing her father and Grace. The party was in a small backyard, modestly decorated but filled with love. Jasmine's mother, Maria, rushed to greet them, hugging Amara tightly. Thank you for coming, Maria said. Jasmine insisted you had to be here. I wouldn't miss it, Amara said. During the party, Jasmine pulled Amara aside. I wanted you to know first, she said, her eyes shining with excitement. I've been accepted to pre-law at State University. I got a scholarship. I'm going to become a lawyer. Amara felt her throat tighten with emotion. Jasmine, that's incredible. Because of you, Jasmine said. Because you showed me what lawyers should be. Not people who hide behind rules and procedures, but people who fight for what's right. I want to be that kind of lawyer. You will be, Amara said with certainty. You already are. You fought for your mother when you were 14 years old with no help and no resources. Law school will just give you better tools for the fight you're already fighting. Will you write me a recommendation letter? Jasmine asked. For law school applications. I'd be honored, Amara said. And Jasmine? When you finish law school, if you want a job, Second Chance will have a place for you. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? We're always looking for people who understand what it means to fight because they've lived it. You're going to be an amazing lawyer." They hugged, and Amara thought about cycles. How pain could become purpose. How victims could become advocates. How one generation's fight could inspire the next. That same year, Second Chance celebrated its 25th anniversary. The organization had grown beyond anything Amara had imagined. They had offices in 12 states now. They had freed over 100 wrongly convicted people. They had trained thousands of lawyers. They had changed laws, influenced policy, shifted the conversation about criminal justice reform. At the anniversary gala, Amara stood before donors and supporters and told them about Jasmine. "This is what we're building," she said. "Not just a legal organization, but a movement. A movement of people who believe that justice should be accessible to everyone, not just those who can afford it. A movement of people who refuse to accept that the system is unchangeable. 25 years ago, I was a desperate child with an impossible dream. Today, we have young people like Jasmine preparing to join this fight, inspired by the same belief that drove me, that one person with faith and determination can make a difference." She paused, looking out at the audience. "But we can't do it alone. We've never done it alone. It takes all of us. Donors who fund the work. Investigators who find the truth. Lawyers who fight the cases. Supporters who spread the word. Clients who trust us with their stories. All of us together, each doing what we can, create something none of us could create alone. So thank you. Thank you for 25 years of partnership. Thank you for believing in second chances. Thank you for helping us prove, over and over again, that no case is truly hopeless, no person is disposable, and no injustice is too entrenched to challenge." The applause was thunderous. But Amara's favorite moment came later, after the formal program ended. An elderly woman approached her, tears streaming down her face. "You don't know me," the woman said. "But 15 years ago, you freed my grandson. He was innocent, in prison for a crime he didn't commit. You fought for him when no one else would. He's 35 now. He's married. He has 2 children. He has a life. Because of you." The woman grabbed Amara's hands. "Those children exist because you didn't give up. My grandson is their father because you fought for him. Do you understand? You didn't just free him. You created the possibility of his entire future. His children, their children someday. All of it exists because you cared enough to fight." Amara was crying now too. "What's his name?" "Your grandson. Marcus. Marcus Chen." Amara's breath caught. Marcus Chen. The same last name as her elderly neighbor who had helped her so long ago. "Is your name Alice Chen?" she asked. The woman nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" "Because your sister helped me when I was 13. She brought me food. She lied to social services to keep me out of foster care. She's the reason I could keep fighting for my father." The 2 women stared at each other, realizing the circle was even more complete than either had known. Alice Chen had a sister who helped Amara. Amara freed Alice's grandson. Everything connected. Everyone's kindness rippling forward, touching lives in ways they would never fully know. They hugged, these 2 women bound by invisible threads of compassion across years and generations. Amara turned 50. Half a century. It seemed impossible. She looked in the mirror and saw gray threading through her hair, lines around her eyes, hands that were starting to show age. She looked like her mother had looked in the few photos that existed. The resemblance was startling. Her father was 80 now, still sharp mentally but physically slowing. He had moved in with Amara after Grace passed away, the 2 of them keeping each other company, cooking dinner together, watching old movies, remembering. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Eli said, "I've been thinking about writing down our story." The real story, not the sensationalized version the media tells. Why? Amara asked. Because stories matter, Eli said. Because someday I won't be here to tell it. And I want people to know what really happened. Not just the miracle, but everything. The struggle. The fear. The doubt. The moments we almost gave up. All of it. That's a good idea, Amara said. But you should write it. You're the better writer. You always were. Over the following months, Amara began writing. Late at night, after her casework was done, she would sit at her computer and remember. She wrote about being 13 and terrified. About visiting her father in prison. About the courthouse and the judge and the impossible promise. She wrote about Harold's transformation, about years of fighting, about victories and losses. But she also wrote about the moments no one knew about. The nights she cried herself to sleep. The times she wanted to quit. The fear that God wasn't listening. The doubt that maybe everyone was right and she was chasing an impossible dream. She wrote honestly, not to make herself look heroic, but to show that faith is messy and doubt is normal and miracles don't erase the struggle that comes before them. The manuscript grew. 50 pages. 100. 200. It became not just her story but a testament to everyone who had helped. Her father. Harold. Mrs. Chen. Marcus Webb. Linda Chen. Sarah Mitchell. Jasmine. All the people whose courage and kindness had contributed to something larger than any of them. When she finished, she sent it to her father to read. He sat in his favorite chair for an entire afternoon, reading, occasionally wiping his eyes. When he reached the end, he looked up at his daughter with pride and love. "This is good," he said. "This is really good. But you left something out." "What?" "The lesson. What do you want people to take from this?" Amara thought about it. "I guess I want them to know that change is possible. That one person can make a difference. That faith and action together can move mountains." "Then say that," Eli encouraged. "Don't just tell the story. Tell them what it means." So Amara added a final chapter, a reflection on everything she had learned. If you're reading this and you're facing something impossible, if you're fighting a system that seems too big to challenge, if everyone is telling you to give up and accept reality, I want you to know something. I was there. I've stood where you're standing. I've felt that desperation, that helplessness, that certainty that nothing will ever change. And I want to tell you that you're wrong. Not wrong to feel it, but wrong to believe it. Because things do change. Systems do bend. Justice does prevail. Not always quickly. Not always easily. But more often than the cynics want you to believe. Here's what I learned. First, do the work. Faith without action is just wishful thinking. Pray, yes. Believe, absolutely. But also gather your evidence. Learn what you need to learn. Make the calls. File the papers. Do every single thing that's humanly possible before you ask for what's humanly impossible. Second, find your people. You can't do this alone. I had my father's faith to sustain me. I had Mrs. Chen's kindness. I had Marcus Webb's guilty conscience. I had Harold's eventual willingness to listen. Find the people who will stand with you, even if they're few. Even if it's just one other person who believes. That's enough. Third, tell the truth. Not your version of the truth. Not a convenient truth. The actual, complicated, messy truth. Truth has power. It cuts through lies like light through darkness. But you have to be brave enough to speak it, even when it costs you something. Fourth, be willing to forgive. This is hard. Really hard. The people who wronged you, who contributed to the injustice, who looked away when they should have helped, you're going to have to forgive them eventually. Not because they deserve it, but because carrying hatred will destroy you. I had to forgive Harold for convicting my father. I had to forgive Marcus for staying silent. I even had to forgive Victor Crane eventually. Forgiveness doesn't mean what they did was okay. It means you're not going to let what they did poison your future. Fifth, remember why you're fighting. In the dark moments, when you want to quit, when it all seems pointless, remember the person you're fighting for. Remember their face. Remember their voice. Remember why they matter. Let that fuel you when nothing else will. Sixth, believe in miracles, but don't wait for them. Work as if everything depends on you. Pray as if everything depends on God. Both are true. The miracle in the chapel didn't happen because I sat around waiting for it. It happened after 3 years of exhausting work, after gathering evidence and filing petitions and refusing to quit. The miracle was the culmination of effort, not a substitute for it. And finally, understand that your fight is part of something bigger. You're not just fighting for one person or one case. You're fighting against a system that needs to change. You're fighting for everyone who will come after you. You're fighting to prove that justice is possible, that faith matters, that one person with courage can challenge the powerful and win. That legacy is bigger than any individual victory. 25 years after that night in the chapel, I'm still fighting. The cases change. The clients change. But the fight remains the same, to make justice accessible to everyone, to give hope to the hopeless, to prove that no one is disposable and no case is truly closed if the truth hasn't been told. I don't know how much longer I'll do this work. I'm getting older. I'm getting tired. But I know the work will continue because I've trained others. I've inspired others. I've shown others that it's possible. And they'll train the next generation, and the next, and the next. That's how movements work. That's how change happens. One person at a time, one fight at a time, one impossible victory at a time. If my story does nothing else, I hope it shows you this: you are more powerful than you know. You are braver than you feel. You are capable of more than you imagine. And the impossible thing you're facing right now? It's not as impossible as it seems. With faith, with work, with perseverance, with truth, you can move that mountain. I know. Because I've done it. And if I could do it at 13 with nothing but hope and determination, you can do it too. Amara published her book. It became a bestseller, not because it was sensational, but because it was honest. People recognized themselves in her struggle. They saw their own impossible situations reflected in her story. They found hope in her victory. Book clubs read it. Churches studied it. Law schools assigned it. Social justice organizations used it for training. And most importantly, people who were facing their own impossible fights read it and found the courage to keep going. Amara did speaking tours, though she hated being away from the work. But she recognized that sharing the story was part of the work. Every talk she gave inspired someone. Every book she signed might give someone the push they needed to not give up. Letters poured in from around the world. A woman in South Africa fighting for her brother's release. A man in India challenging a wrongful conviction. A teenager in the Philippines trying to help her father. All of them saying the same thing: your story gave me hope. Your story showed me it's possible. Thank you. But the letter that meant the most came from an unexpected source. It was from Victor Crane, now in his 80s and in poor health. Dear Ms. Thompson, it read. I know I have no right to write to you. I know my apology decades ago was inadequate. But I read your book, and I wanted you to know something. You were right about me. About everything. I was greedy. I was negligent. I let an innocent man go to prison to save myself. I destroyed your childhood to protect my reputation. There's no excuse for that. No justification. But I want you to know that your story, and particularly your father's forgiveness, changed what remained of my life. After I was released from prison, I was bitter. I felt sorry for myself. I blamed everyone but me. But then I heard about Second Chance, about all the people you were helping. I heard how you had forgiven me. How your father had forgiven me. And I realized I had been given something I didn't deserve, mercy. So I've spent these last years trying to pay it forward. I volunteer at a legal aid clinic in my city. I help people navigate the system I once used to crush them. I speak at business schools about ethical responsibilities, about how cutting corners and prioritizing profit over people destroys lives. It's not enough. It doesn't undo the harm. But it's something. And I wanted you to know that your capacity to forgive, to see people as redeemable even at their worst, that changed me. You didn't just free your father. You freed me too. From bitterness. From self-justification. From the prison of my own making. Thank you. And I'm sorry. I'll never stop being sorry. With deepest regret and profound respect, Victor Crane. Amara read the letter 3 times, then showed it to her father. Eli read it silently, then folded it carefully. Well, he said. I guess miracles keep happening. You're not angry? Amara asked. That he gets to have redemption after what he did? Angry? Eli shook his head. No. I'm grateful. Grateful that even someone like Victor Crane can change. Because if he can change, anyone can. And that means no one is beyond hope. That's a beautiful thing, Amara. That's what your story really proves. Not just that you freed me, but that everyone, even the worst of us, can become better. They sat together in comfortable silence, 2 people who had been through hell and come out believing in grace. The years continued to pass. Amara turned 60. Second Chance celebrated its 40th anniversary. Over 200 people had been freed. Thousands more had been helped with other legal issues. The organization had become a national model for criminal justice reform. Jasmine Mitchell, now a lawyer herself, had joined Second Chance's leadership team. She was brilliant and fierce and dedicated, everything Amara had hoped she would be. Other young lawyers who had been inspired by the story also joined, creating a new generation of advocates. Amara began to step back, letting the younger generation lead. It was time. She had fought for 47 years, since she was 13 years old. She was tired. Her body ached in ways it never had before. She wanted time with her father while he was still here. She wanted to travel, to rest, to simply be instead of always doing. Her farewell speech at Second Chance was emotional. I'm not dying, she said with a laugh, wiping tears. I'm just retiring. Finally. After 4.5 decades, I think I've earned some rest. The room was packed with people whose lives she had touched. Former clients. Colleagues. Mentors and ments. Jasmine stood in the front row, crying openly. But I want you to know this, Amara continued. The work doesn't end because I'm stepping away. If anything, it's more important than ever. There are still innocent people in prison. There are still families being torn apart by injustice. There are still powerful people who think they can escape accountability. And there are still desperate people who need someone to believe them, to fight for them, to refuse to give up on them. That's you now. That's your job. Be for others what this organization was for me and my father, a place of hope, a source of help, a refusal to accept that anything is truly impossible. She paused, emotion overwhelming her. 47 years ago, I made a promise to a judge. I promised that if he freed my father, I would heal him. And I kept that promise. But I want you to understand something, I'm still keeping it. Because the healing didn't stop with Harold's legs. It continued in every person we freed. Every family we reunited. Every wrong we made right. That's the real healing. That's the real miracle. And it happens every single day in this place, through your work, through your dedication, through your refusal to give up. So keep fighting. Keep believing. Keep showing the world that justice is possible, that faith matters, that love is stronger than hate, and that truth will always, eventually, prevail. I may be stepping away, but the promise continues. The healing continues. The miracle continues. Through all of you. The standing ovation lasted 10 minutes. People lined up to hug her, to thank her, to tell her what she had meant to them. It took 3 hours to get through everyone. Finally, as the building emptied, Jasmine approached. "I can't imagine this place without you," she said. "You don't have to imagine it without me," Amara said. "I'll still be around. I'll consult on difficult cases. I'll come to the monthly meetings. I'm just not going to be here every day, running everything. That's your job now." "I'm terrified," Jasmine admitted. "Good," Amara said. "I was terrified at 13 when I stood up to Judge Whitmore. I was terrified at 23 when I argued my first case. I was terrified at 40 when we opened our 10th office. Fear means you understand how important this is. Fear means you care enough to worry about getting it right. Use that fear. Let it make you better." "Did you ever stop being scared?" Jasmine asked. Amara thought about it honestly. "No. Never. Every case still scares me. Every client represents a life hanging in the balance. That's terrifying. But I learned to move forward despite the fear. That's what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act anyway." They hugged, mentor and mentor, one generation passing the torch to the next. "You're ready for this," Amara said. "I know you are. Because you've already done the hardest thing, you fought for someone you loved when the whole world said it was hopeless. Everything else is just applying those same principles on a larger scale. Will you tell me if I'm doing it wrong?" Jasmine asked. Amara smiled. "You won't do it wrong. You'll do it differently than I did, because you're you and not me. And that's exactly as it should be. Every generation has to find their own way. Just keep the core principles: truth, compassion, perseverance, faith. Everything else you'll figure out as you go. This is where we are now. This is where the story has led us. From a desperate 13-year-old girl to a nationwide movement for justice. From one impossible promise to hundreds of lives changed. From doubt and fear to faith and action. But the story isn't over. It continues every time someone refuses to accept injustice. Every time someone fights for the truth. Every time someone believes in the impossible. So let me ask you, what's your impossible? What's the fight you're facing that everyone says you can't win? What's the promise you need to make, the stand you need to take, the mountain you need to move? Drop a comment and tell us. Share your story. Because maybe, just maybe, your story will inspire someone else. Maybe your fight will give someone else courage. Maybe your impossible will become someone else's hope. And if this story has touched you, if it's changed how you think about faith or justice or what's possible, hit that subscribe button. Because we're going to keep sharing stories like this. Stories of people who refuse to quit. Stories of miracles both big and small. Stories that remind us that we're more powerful than we know and more capable than we imagine. Share this video. Let it reach someone who needs it today. Someone who's about to give up. Someone who thinks their situation is hopeless. Let this story be the thing that changes their mind, that gives them strength for one more day, one more fight, one more step toward their impossible goal. Amara spent her retirement doing the things she had never had time for. She traveled, seeing parts of the world she had only read about. She took painting classes and discovered she was terrible at it, but enjoyed it anyway. She read books that weren't case law. She slept in late sometimes. But mostly, she spent time with her father. They would sit together for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes just being in each other's presence. The bond forged in crisis had deepened into something peaceful and profound. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching fireflies, Eli said, "I'm proud of you. I know I've said it before, but I want to say it again. I'm so proud of who you became." "I became who you taught me to be," Amara said. "You taught me that kindness matters. That truth matters. That we fight for what's right even when it's hard." "I taught you to read by candlelight," Eli said with a smile. "You taught yourself everything else." "You taught me faith," Amara corrected. "You showed me what it looks like to believe in something bigger than yourself. Everything I did came from that foundation." Eli reached over and took his daughter's hand. "Do you remember what you asked me once? When you were little, before everything happened? You asked me what I wanted to be remembered for." "I remember," Amara said. "You said you wanted to be remembered as someone who fixed things. And you know what?" Eli said, his eyes bright. "I think I can say I did that. Not engines, though I fixed plenty of those. But I helped fix something broken in the world. Through you. Through what you did. I'm part of that. And that's a pretty good legacy for a mechanic from nowhere." They sat in the fading light, father and daughter, two people who had survived the impossible and come out believing in miracles. 3 years later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Eli Thompson passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 85. He had lived to see his daughter celebrated, his name cleared, his grandchildren through Amara's life's work if not through biology walk free from prisons. It was a good death, following a good life. At his funeral, Amara spoke about her father with love and pride. "My father was not a famous man," she said. "He didn't hold positions of power. He didn't have wealth or influence. He was a mechanic who fixed engines and fed stray dogs and loved his daughter more than anything in the world. But he changed the world anyway. Because he taught me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things if they have faith and refuse to quit. He taught me that being powerless is only true if you believe it. And he taught me that love, real love, is the most powerful force in the universe." She paused, looking at the simple casket. "He spent 3 years in prison for something he didn't do. Those years cost him dearly. They cost both of us. But he never became bitter. He never stopped being kind. He never stopped believing in the goodness of people, even people who had hurt him. And when we finally won, when justice was served, he didn't celebrate his vindication. He celebrated being home with me. Because that's what mattered to him. Not being right. Not being acknowledged. Just being with the people he loved. If you want to honor my father's memory, do this: believe in second chances. Believe that people can change, that systems can be challenged, that justice can prevail. And when you see injustice, when you see someone being crushed by a system too big for them to fight alone, don't look away. Don't assume someone else will help. Be the someone. Be the person who cares enough to act. That's what my father taught me. That's his legacy. And it's the best gift anyone has ever given me." After the funeral, as people offered condolences, Jasmine approached Amara. "I'm so sorry," she said, hugging her tightly. "He was wonderful." "He was," Amara agreed. "And you know what? He got to see everything. He saw you become a lawyer. He saw a second chance grow. He saw 200 people freed. He saw his story become a force for good in the world. Not everyone gets that. Not everyone lives to see their suffering redeemed. But he did. And I'm grateful for that." "What will you do now?" Jasmine asked. "I don't know," Amara admitted. "For 47 years, I've been fighting. First for him, then for others. Now, for the first time in my life, I don't have a fight. I don't know who I am without one." "You're the woman who taught us all to fight," Jasmine said. "That doesn't change just because you're not actively in the arena. You're still our teacher, our inspiration, our reminder that impossible things are possible." Amara smiled through her tears. "Then I guess I'll keep doing that. telling the story, encouraging the fighters, reminding people that miracles are real. And she did. For the next decade, Amara became a living testament to the power of faith and perseverance. She wrote more books. She spoke at conferences. She mentored young activists and lawyers. She showed up at trials to support people who were fighting impossible battles, her presence alone a reminder that someone had fought before them and won. On what would have been Harold Whitmore's 100th birthday, Second Chance held a special commemoration. They unveiled a statue outside their headquarters, 3 figures, a man in a wheelchair, a young girl kneeling beside him, and another man standing behind them with his hand on the girl's shoulder. Judge Harold Whitmore, 13-year-old Amara, and Eli Thompson. The moment that changed everything. Amara stood before the statue, now 70 years old herself, and thought about the journey. From that desperate child to this woman who had helped change the legal landscape of the nation. From that impossible promise to hundreds of kept promises. From one miracle to countless miracles, big and small. They laughed at me, she told the crowd gathered for the unveiling. That day in the courtroom, when I made that promise, they laughed. They thought I was crazy. And maybe I was. Maybe it was crazy to think a 13-year-old could challenge a judge. Maybe it was crazy to believe in miracles. Maybe it was crazy to think one person could make a difference. But you know what? Crazy won. Impossible happened. The miracle came true. Not just once, but over and over, for 57 years and continuing. So the next time someone laughs at your dream, the next time someone says what you want to do is impossible, the next time the whole world tells you to give up and accept reality, remember this statue. Remember this story. And then go do the impossible anyway. Because that's what we're here for. To prove that faith moves mountains. To show that love conquers hate. To demonstrate that justice, real justice, is possible if we're willing to fight for it. That was the promise I made 57 years ago. And I'm still keeping it. Every day. Every case. Every fight. The healing continues. The crowd erupted in applause. The statue gleamed in the afternoon sun, bronze figures frozen in the moment before the impossible became reality. And Amara Thompson, the girl who wouldn't quit, the woman who changed the world, looked at it and smiled. The work continued. The promise continued. The miracle continued. And it always would, as long as there were people willing to believe. Amara Thompson died peacefully at the age of 78, surrounded by her Second Chance family. She had lived long enough to see over 500 people freed through the organization she had helped build. She had trained 3 generations of lawyers. She had changed countless laws. She had proven, definitively, that one person with faith and determination could indeed move mountains. At her funeral, which was held at St. Mary's Chapel naturally, Jasmine Mitchell, now in her 60s and leading Second Chance, gave the eulogy. Amara used to say that she wasn't special, Jasmine began. That she was just an ordinary girl who cared enough to try. But that's not quite true. She was special. Not because she had superpowers or divine gifts, but because she refused to accept the world as it was. She insisted on making it better. And then she spent her entire life doing exactly that. She taught us that faith without action is empty. That justice requires courage. That miracles are real, but they usually require us to do the work first. She showed us that forgiveness is more powerful than vengeance, that truth is stronger than lies, and that love, real sacrificial love, can change everything. Jasmine paused, emotion overwhelming her. Because Amara loved her father, an innocent man walked free. Because she loved justice, hundreds more walked free after him. Because she loved humanity, even at its worst, people like Victor Crane and even Judge Whitmore in his harsh years were able to find redemption. That's her legacy. Not just the people freed, though that's remarkable. Not just the laws changed, though that matters. But the proof, living proof, that loving your neighbor as yourself isn't just a nice sentiment. It's a revolutionary act that can transform the world. The congregation stood and applauded, a strange thing at a funeral, but appropriate for a life that had been anything but ordinary. After the service, as people filed past Amara's casket to pay their respects, they noticed something. She was buried holding two things, a photograph of her father, and a small wooden cross that Judge Harold Whitmore had given her years ago, carved by his own hands during his physical therapy, a thank-you gift for the miracle that changed his life. And on her gravestone, below her name and dates, was an inscription she had chosen herself. She believed impossible things were possible. And then she proved it. The story ends here, but the legacy continues. Second Chance Legal Services still operates in 15 states. Jasmine Mitchell leads it with the same passion Amara once did. And every year, on the anniversary of that night in the chapel when a paralyzed judge stood and walked for the first time in 7 years, the entire organization gathers at St. Mary's to remember. To give thanks. To renew their commitment to fighting for justice, for believing in miracles, for refusing to quit. Young lawyers join the organization still, inspired by Amara's story. Some knew her personally. Others only know her through her writings and speeches. But all of them come because they believe what she believed, that one person can make a difference. That faith matters. That miracles are real. That impossible is just a word. And they carry forward the promise Amara made so many years ago. They keep healing. They keep fighting. They keep believing. One case at a time. One person, one case at a time. One person at a time. One impossible victory at a time. The promise continues. Because that's what Amara Thompson ultimately proved, that a promise made in faith, kept through action, creates ripples that never stop spreading. Those ripples become waves. Those waves become tides. And those tides change the entire landscape. Somewhere right now, there's a child visiting a parent in prison, believing against all evidence that somehow, someway, justice will prevail. Somewhere right now, there's a lawyer taking on a case everyone says is hopeless, remembering that Amara did the same thing and won. Somewhere right now, there's a judge reconsidering a decision, remembering that Harold Whitmore had the courage to admit he was wrong and became a better man for it. Somewhere right now, there's a person in a wheelchair praying for healing, and whether that healing comes physically or spiritually, they're learning that miracles take many forms. And somewhere right now, someone is reading this story, facing their own impossible situation, and deciding not to give up. Deciding to fight one more day. Deciding to believe when belief seems foolish. Deciding to act when action seems pointless. That person is Amara's true legacy. You might be that person. You might be facing your own paralyzed judge, your own wrongful conviction, your own impossible promise. And if you are, I want you to hear what Amara would tell you if she were here: you are not alone. Others have stood where you stand. Others have faced what you face. Others have fought battles that seemed unwinnable and won them anyway. The impossible is only impossible until someone does it. And then it becomes the blueprint for everyone who comes after. So what's your fight? What's your impossible promise? What's the mountain you need to move? Don't wait for perfect conditions. Don't wait until you have all the answers. Don't wait until you feel brave enough or strong enough or ready enough. Start now. Do the next right thing in front of you. Gather your evidence. Make your calls. File your papers. Have your conversations. Pray your prayers. Take your stand. And then, when you've done everything humanly possible, ask for what's humanly impossible. Ask for the miracle. But don't just ask with words. Ask with action. Ask with persistence. Ask with a refusal to accept any answer except yes. Because here's the secret that Amara discovered and proved over 57 years of fighting: the universe responds to determined faith. God honors courageous action. Justice bends toward those who won't stop pushing. Not always in our timing. Not always in the way we expect. But it happens. More often than the cynics want you to believe. More powerfully than the skeptics can explain. 13-year-old Amara Thompson stood in a courtroom and made a promise that everyone said was impossible. She promised to heal a man that medicine couldn't heal. She promised to free a father that the system wouldn't free. She promised to change things that people said couldn't be changed. They laughed at her. They dismissed her. They told her to accept reality. But she didn't. She refused. She kept fighting, kept believing, kept working, kept praying. And the impossible happened. The judge walked. The father was freed. The system was challenged. Lives were changed. Laws were reformed. A movement was born. Not because she was special. Not because she had powers others don't have. But because she cared enough to try. Because she believed enough to act. Because she refused to quit even when quitting would have been so much easier. That same power lives in you. That same potential exists in your story. Your impossible is just as possible as hers was. Your mountain can be moved just as surely as hers was. Your miracle is waiting just as certainly as hers was. But it requires something from you. It requires faith paired with action. Hope paired with work. Prayer paired with persistence. Belief paired with courage. You have to want it enough to fight for it. You have to believe it enough to work for it. You have to love someone or something enough to sacrifice for it. And when you do, when you put everything into your impossible fight, when you refuse to accept no for an answer, when you keep going even when everyone says to stop, that's when miracles happen. That's when mountains move. That's when the impossible becomes possible. That's when your story becomes someone else's inspiration. That's when your fight becomes their hope. That's when your victory proves to the world that faith still matters, that truth still wins, that love still conquers, that justice still prevails. So here's what I want you to do right now. If this story has moved you, if it's spoken to something in your heart, if it's given you even a small spark of hope for your own impossible situation, I need you to do 3 things. First, leave a comment. Tell us you're impossible. Tell us what you're fighting for. Tell us what promise you need to keep. Share your story, because your story matters. Your fight matters. And maybe, just maybe, sharing it will give you the accountability and support you need to keep going. Maybe someone reading your comment will have advice, resources, or encouragement. Maybe your comment will inspire someone else who's facing something similar. Don't underestimate the power of speaking your truth out loud. Second, subscribe to this channel. Hit that button right now. Because we're going to keep bringing you stories like this. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories of faith in action. Stories of impossible victories. Stories that remind you that you're more powerful than you know, more capable than you believe, and more loved than you understand. You need these reminders. We all do. In a world that constantly tells us to be realistic, to lower our expectations, to accept limitations, we need voices that say the opposite. That say dream bigger. Believe harder. Fight longer. Your impossible is possible. Subscribe so you never miss those voices. Third, and this is the most important, go do your next right thing. Whatever your impossible is, whatever your fight looks like, whatever your promise demands, there's something you can do right now. Today. Maybe it's making a phone call. Maybe it's doing research. Maybe it's having a hard conversation. Maybe it's just praying with real intention instead of empty repetition. Maybe it's forgiving someone you've been holding a grudge against. Maybe it's asking for help when you've been trying to do everything alone. Whatever it is, do it. Right now. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Now. Because momentum builds. One action leads to another. One step makes the next step visible. And before you know it, you've walked a mile you didn't think you could walk. You've climbed a mountain you didn't think you could climb. You've achieved an impossible thing you didn't think you could achieve. Amara Thompson was 13 years old with no power, no money, no resources, no training. All she had was love for her father and faith in a God who hears desperate prayers. And she changed the world. If she could do that, what can you do? What will you do? The story doesn't end here. It continues with you. With your fight. With your faith. With your impossible made possible. So go. Fight. Believe. And when you win, when your impossible becomes reality, when your miracle happens, come back and tell us. Because your victory will be someone else's hope. Your story will be someone else's inspiration. Your impossible will prove to someone else that theirs is possible too. That's how change happens. That's how movements grow. That's how miracles multiply. One story at a time. One person at a time. One impossible promise kept at a time. Now go. Your impossible is waiting. And it's more possible than you think.